The Blue Ridge Mountains cast long shadows as dusk settled over Oakwood Valley. A lone woman stood watch from her cabin porch, rifle balanced against the railing, eyes scanning the distant tree line. Life on the frontier had taught Eleanor Harding that kindness could be dangerous, but sometimes the most dangerous choice was the one that saved your soul. When she found a wounded Cherokee boy hiding in her cellar, she faced an impossible decision. Little did she know that her choice would echo through the mountains, bringing riders with painted faces to her doorstep 5 days later. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first autumn frost painted the grass silver around Eleanor Harding's cabin. Nestled in a small clearing at the edge of Oakwood Valley, the modest log structure stood as a testament to stubborn survival against the unforgiving wilderness of 1838 Georgia. Eleanor wrapped her woolen shawl tighter, watching her breath cloud in the chill morning air as she drew water from the well. 4 years she'd lived here alone since typhoid fever took William. 4 years of chopping her own firewood, hunting, game when supplies ran low, and keeping trespassers at bay with a loaded Springfield rifle and an unwavering gaze. The cabin's timbers had weathered grey, much like Eleanor herself, not yet 40, but with streaks of silver threading through her chestnut hair and lines etching themselves around her eyes. The water bucket sloshed as she carried it inside. Her small plot of corn had yielded just enough to see her through winter if she was careful. The root cellar was stocked with potatoes, carrots, and beets. 2 smoked venison haunches hung from the rafters. It wasn't prosperity, but it was survival, and that's all Eleanor had asked of life since burying her husband beneath the oak tree that gave the valley its name. It had rained the night before, a cold, slanting downpour that drummed against the shake-shingled roof and found every crack in the chinking between logs. Eleanor had stayed awake listening to it, wondering if her roof would hold another season. As she stirred her morning porridge, something caught her attention. A sound that didn't belong, not the usual creaking of the cabin settling, not the familiar calls of blue jays or the rustle of squirrels in the nearby hickory trees. This was different, a soft, barely perceptible scraping beneath the floorboards. Eleanor froze, wooden spoon suspended over the pot. She glanced at the trapdoor in the corner of the room, the entrance to her root cellar. Slowly, she set down the spoon and reached for the rifle that never strayed far from her reach. The Springfield felt cold and familiar in her hands as she approached the trapdoor, each step deliberate on the rough-hewn planks. The sound came again, a muffled shift of weight, then silence. Someone, or something, was in her cellar. Bears weren't uncommon in these mountains, though they rarely ventured so close to human dwellings. A raccoon might have found its way in, searching for food. But Eleanor hadn't survived this long by making optimistic assumptions. She slid the iron bolt back from the trapdoor and raised it just enough to peer into the darkness below. At first, she saw nothing but the dim outlines of her food stores. Then movement caught her eye, a shadow darker than the rest, huddled between 2 barrels of salted pork. "I know you're there," Eleanor called, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Come out now, or I'll shoot." Silence, then a soft, pained exhalation, distinctly human. Eleanor raised the trapdoor fully, keeping her rifle aimed into the darkness. "I won't ask again." The shadow moved, and a face emerged from the darkness, a boy no more than 12 years old, with copper skin and straight black hair that fell across his forehead. His dark eyes regarded her with a mixture of fear and defiance, but it was the blood-soaked cloth wrapped around his upper arm that drew Eleanor's attention most sharply. "Cherokee?" she whispered, recognizing the distinctive features and the remnants of traditional clothing beneath the mud and blood. The boy didn't speak, just watched her with those wary eyes, his body tense as a cornered fox. Eleanor knew what finding a Cherokee child meant. Rumors had been spreading for months about the forced relocations, what some were calling the Trail of Tears, soldiers and militiamen rounding up Cherokee families across Georgia, forcing them westward toward Indian territory. There had been resistance, escapes, and sometimes brutal consequences. "You're hurt," Eleanor said, stating the obvious. The rifle remained steady in her hands, but her finger eased away from the trigger. The boy's gaze flicked to the rifle, then back to her face. His lips were cracked from thirst, his cheeks hollow with hunger. Eleanor drew a slow breath. Harboring a Cherokee fugitive could mean trouble, perhaps deadly trouble. The local militia had made their position clear. Any Indian sympathizers would be treated as enemies. Just last spring, the miller's farm 10 miles south had been burned to the ground after rumors spread they'd given shelter to a Cherokee family, fleeing the roundups. But the boy before her wasn't a political statement or a symbol of resistance. He was a wounded child, alone and afraid. "I'm going to come down," Eleanor said, setting her rifle aside but within reach. "Don't try anything." The wooden ladder creaked as she descended into the cellar. The boy shrank back against the wall, watching her every movement. Up close she could see the wound better, a deep gash that needed cleaning, probably from a knife or bayonet. "What's your name?" she asked, keeping her distance. The boy remained silent, but his eyes never left her face. "I'm Eleanor," she offered, tapping her chest. "Eleanor Harding." After a long pause, the boy touched his own chest. "Tsali," he said, his voice rough from disuse or thirst. "Tsali," Eleanor repeated. "You need water, food, and that arm needs tending." She climbed back up the ladder and returned with a wooden cup of water. The boy, Tsali, took it with his good hand, drinking deeply. When he finished, Eleanor gestured toward the ladder. "Come up, I can't treat you down here." Tsali hesitated, then slowly rose to his feet, wincing as the movement jostled his injured arm. He was small for his age, but wiry, with the resilient strength that came from life in the mountains. He followed Eleanor up the ladder, movements careful and deliberate, eyes constantly scanning the cabin for threats or escape routes. In the light of the main room, the severity of his wound became clear. The makeshift bandage, torn from his own shirt, was soaked through with blood, both fresh and dried. Eleanor guided him to a chair by the hearth and built up the fire to boil water. "How long have you been in my cellar?" She asked, as she gathered clean cloths and the small wooden box that held her medical supplies. Herbs, a sewing needle, catgut thread, and a bottle of whiskey William had traded for years ago. Tsali held up 2 fingers. 2 days. Eleanor raised her eyebrows. "You're quiet as a mouse, I'll give you that." The boy's lips twitched, almost a smile. As Eleanor soaked a cloth in hot water, she considered what his presence meant. If he'd been hiding for 2 days, whoever was pursuing him might have moved on, or they might still be searching. Either way, the decision before her was clear: help him and risk everything, or turn him out and carry the weight of that choice for the rest of her days. "This will hurt," she warned, gesturing to the whiskey bottle. Tsali nodded once, jaw set. When she poured the liquor over his wound, he stiffened but didn't cry out. Eleanor worked swiftly, cleaning the gash, applying a poultice of yarrow and comfrey, then stitching the deepest part with neat, small sutures. Throughout it all, Tsali remained stoic, his only reactions the occasional sharp intake of breath or the tightening of his good hand on the edge of the chair. "You've been brave before," Eleanor observed, wrapping a clean bandage around his arm. "This isn't your first pain." Something flickered in Tsali's eyes, a shadow of memory perhaps, or understanding beyond his years. He said something in Cherokee, then seeing her confusion switched to halting English. "My people, they know the pain now." Eleanor nodded slowly. The newspapers from Augusta had painted the Cherokee removal as a necessary relocation, but travelers passing through told different stories, of families torn from homes they'd held for generations, of the elderly and children dying on forced marches, of resistance met with rifle butts and bayonets. "The soldiers?" she asked, nodding toward his arm. Sally's expression darkened. "Militia. Take my mother, sister, I run. Man with red beard." He mimed a slashing motion. "I hide, walk." Many nights. Eleanor's stomach tightened. Redbeard likely meant Jeremiah Briggs, a militia captain known for his zeal in rounding up Cherokee families and his harsh methods toward those who resisted. If Briggs was involved, the boy's situation was even more perilous than she'd imagined. "You need to eat, then rest," she said, turning toward her store of provisions. She sliced bread, cheese, and dried venison, setting them before Sally, who ate with the careful restraint of someone who had known real hunger. As he ate, Eleanor moved to the cabin's single window, peering out at the clearing and the forest beyond. The morning mist was burning off, revealing a landscape empty of movement, but emptiness could be deceiving in these mountains. Eyes could be watching from anywhere. "You can stay today," she found herself saying, "until your arm is stronger." Then she left the sentence unfinished, unsure herself what would come next. Charlie looked up from his food, dark eyes serious in his young face. "Dangerous for you." Eleanor couldn't argue with that. Instead, she busied herself with household tasks, stoking the fire, sweeping the floor, organizing her meager supplies. All the while, her mind churned with the implications of her decision. If caught harboring a Cherokee boy, especially one possibly being hunted by Briggs and his militia, she could face punishment ranging from property seizure to imprisonment, or worse. Yet watching Sally finish his meal and slump with exhaustion in the chair, she couldn't bring herself to regret her choice. Not yet, anyway. "You can sleep there," she said, pointing to a pallet near the hearth. "I'll wake you if there's trouble." Sally nodded gratefully and settled onto the blankets. Within minutes, he was asleep, the lines of tension in his face smoothing out, making him look every bit the child he was. Eleanor picked up her rifle and settled into the rocking chair William had crafted for her during the first year of their marriage. From there, she could watch both the window and the door while keeping an eye on her unexpected guest. The weight of the Springfield across her lap was reassuring, though she harbored no illusions about her chances if Briggs and his men came. Calling. Outside, a hawk cried, its voice echoing across the valley. Eleanor rocked slowly, her vigilance unwavering as the morning sunlight crept across the cabin floor. By midday, the autumn sun had warmed the cabin enough that Eleanor opened the door to let in fresh air. Charlie slept on, his body claiming the rest it desperately needed. She took the opportunity to check her surroundings more thoroughly, walking the perimeter of her small clearing, searching for any sign of intruders or pursuit. The forest stood, silent and seemingly empty, but Eleanor had lived in these mountains long enough to sense subtle shifts in the woodland's mood. Birds singing normally, squirrels chattering undisturbed. These were good signs. The mountains had ways of warning those who knew how to listen. When she returned to the cabin, Sally was awake, sitting upright on the pallet, eyes immediately fixing on her as she entered. "All quiet outside," she assured him, setting her rifle beside the door. "How's the arm?" The boy rotated his shoulder cautiously. "Better. You have healing hands." Eleanor's lips curved in a small smile. "My grandmother was a midwife. She taught me some things before she passed. She prepared a simple stew with dried venison, potatoes, and the last of her summer carrots. As it simmered over the fire, filling the cabin with savory scents, Sally watched her with frank curiosity. "You live alone," he observed. It wasn't a question. Eleanor nodded. "My husband died 4 years ago. No children. No family come for you. I have a brother in Savannah, but we haven't spoken in years." She stirred the stew, not elaborating on the rift that had formed when she chose to marry William Harding, a man her family deemed beneath their station. This place was William's dream, not mine, but it's mine now. Charlie seemed to consider this. Cherokee say, spirits of loved ones stay in places they love. Eleanor had never thought of it that way, but something about the idea resonated. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings or early mornings, she could almost feel William's presence in the cabin he'd built with such care. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maybe that's why I stay, she admitted, more to herself than to the boy. As they ate their stew from wooden bowls, Eleanor found herself wondering about Sally's family, where they were, if they were alive, if they knew their son had escaped. The forced relocations had scattered Cherokee families across hundreds of miles, many never to be reunited. Your father, she ventured, is he with your mother? Sally set down his spoon, expression grave. My father is Niganigi, war chief of our clan. He was in the mountains when soldiers came. His eyes took on a distant look. He will search for us. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. A Cherokee war chief's son, this complicated matters even further. If Charlie's father was indeed searching for his family, he might eventually track his son to her cabin. And if Briggs and his militia were still hunting the boy, they might well be watching for signs of the father as well. She had unwittingly placed herself at the center of a dangerous convergence. As evening approached, Eleanor showed Sally how to keep low and out of sight of the windows. She taught him the signals she would use if danger approached. 2 quick taps on the floor meant hide, 3 meant flee through the back window, where she kept a ladder concealed in the bushes. Why do you help? Sally asked suddenly, as darkness fell, and Eleanor lit a single candle. White people hate Cherokee now. Eleanor considered the question carefully. Not all white people think the same, she said finally. What's happening to your people? It isn't right. And you're just a boy. I couldn't turn you away. Sally's gaze was penetrating, as if he were measuring the truth of her words. My father says judge people by actions, not words. Your father sounds wise. The boy nodded solemnly. Wisest man in mountains, and most dangerous to enemies. That night, Eleanor slept lightly, waking at every creak of the cabin's timbers and rustle of wind through the trees. Sally slept on his pallet near the dying embers of the fire, one hand always near the small knife he'd kept hidden in his leggings. Even in sleep, the boy maintained a watchful readiness that spoke volumes about the life he'd been forced to live. Just before dawn, Eleanor was woken by a sound that sent ice through her veins, hoofbeats approaching from the south. She was on, her feet instantly moving to shake Sally awake. Someone's coming, she whispered. 2 taps, remember? The boy nodded, fully alert in an instant. Eleanor tapped twice on the floor, and Sally slipped into the root cellar with the silent efficiency of a shadow. She closed the trapdoor, sliding a woven rug over it, then positioned herself by the window, rifle ready. 4 riders emerged from the tree line, men in the rough clothing of the frontier, 3 with rifles across their saddles, 1 with a distinctive red beard, Jeremiah Briggs. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched them approach her cabin. The moment of reckoning had arrived sooner than she'd feared. Eleanor took a steadying breath and smoothed down her skirt. She placed her rifle against the wall, visible enough to serve as a warning, but not in her hands, where it might be perceived as an immediate threat. Then she stepped onto the porch, closing the cabin door firmly behind her. Jeremiah Briggs raised his hand, and the 4 riders halted 20 yards from her cabin. The morning light caught in his red beard, making it appear aflame. He wore no official uniform, just the rough clothing of the frontier with a tarnished militia badge pinned to his leather vest. The other men were familiar faces from Thornwood, the nearest settlement: Benjamin Walsh, the blacksmith's son; Thomas Holt, a former trapper turned bounty hunter; and Frank Lewis, whose family owned the largest cattle operation in the county. "Mornin', Widow Harding," Briggs called, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. There was a forced pleasantness to his tone that did nothing to mask the hardness in his eyes. "Mr. Briggs," Eleanor acknowledged with a slight nod, "what brings you and your men to my property at this hour?" Briggs dismounted, handing his reins to Walsh. He approached the cabin slowly, thumbs hooked in his belt near where a Colt revolver rested in a worn holster. "Official business, ma'am. We're tracking a young Cherokee fugitive, boy about 12 years old." His eyes scanned the cabin behind her, searching for any sign of disturbance or additional presence. "Escaped during a legitimate relocation operation 3 days back." "Legitimate," Eleanor repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. Briggs's expression soured. "The Indian Removal Act is the law of the land, Mrs. Harding. President Van Buren himself has ordered the relocations to continue. We're simply doing our duty." "And what duty brings you to my doorstep specifically?" Eleanor kept her voice neutral, though her heart pounded so loudly she was sure they must hear it. "We found tracks leading in this direction." Briggs gestured vaguely toward the northern edge of her clearing. "Boys wounded, knife wound to the arm, might be seeking help or shelter." "I've seen no Cherokee boy," Eleanor said. The words technically true. She'd found him, not seen him approach. "Haven't had any visitors in weeks, in fact." Briggs studied her face, searching for deception. Behind him, Walsh and Holt exchanged glances. "Mind if we take a look around?" Briggs asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't truly a request. Eleanor hesitated. Refusing would only heighten their suspicions, but allowing a search meant risking Sally's discovery. She prayed the boy had hidden himself well in the root cellar. "I mind very much," she said firmly, "but I suspect you'll look regardless of my wishes." Briggs's mouth curved in what might have been a smile on a less brutal face. "Just doing our job, ma'am." He signaled to his men, and they dismounted, tying their horses to the fence posts Eleanor had set around her small vegetable garden. As they approached, she felt a flicker of fear. These weren't lawmen in any proper sense, just armed men with the government's tacit permission to hunt down Cherokee families. "I'll ask you to be respectful of my property," Eleanor said, stepping aside to allow them onto the porch. "My husband may be gone, but this is still my home." Briggs nodded perfunctorily and pushed past her into the cabin, the other men following. Eleanor trailed behind, heart in her throat as they began their search. Walsh checked behind the furniture, while Lewis examined the small, sleeping alcove where Eleanor's bed was situated. Holt poked through her storage chests and cupboards. Briggs, meanwhile, walked slowly around the perimeter of the main room, boot heels heavy on the wooden floor. Eleanor fought to keep her expression neutral as he passed over the trapdoor, now concealed by the woven rug. He paused, bending to examine something on the floor. "You've been treating a wound recently, Mrs. Harding?" he asked, pointing to a small bloodstain on a floorboard that Eleanor had failed to completely scrub away. "Cut myself chopping wood yesterday," she replied without hesitation. "Nothing serious." Briggs straightened, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Seems you live quite independently out here for a woman alone." "Necessity teaches quickly," Eleanor said. The men continued their search, finding nothing of consequence. Eleanor began to hope they might leave soon, until Frank Lewis emerged from the storage area at the back of the cabin holding something aloft. "Found this behind the flour barrel," he said, displaying a small deerskin pouch decorated with colored beads and feathers. "Cherokee craftsmanship, I'd wager." Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't seen the pouch before. Sally must have dropped. It during his initial hiding or when transferring to the root cellar, Briggs took the pouch, examining it before fixing Eleanor with a hard stare. "Care to explain this, Mrs. Harding? I trade with passing merchants," she said calmly. "Bought that from a peddler last spring. Pretty craftsmanship, I thought." "Interesting," Briggs said, clearly unconvinced. "And this peddler, he specialized in Indian trinkets, did he?" "He sold what he could carry," Eleanor replied. "I needed a pouch for my sewing needles." The tension in the room thickened. Briggs rolled the pouch between his fingers, then abruptly emptied its contents onto the table. A small carved wooden figure of a bear, several polished stones, and what appeared to be a lock of black hair tied with sinew. Not items a white settler woman would typically carry. "Your sewing needles seem to have wandered off," Briggs remarked dryly. Outside, one of the horses whinnied nervously. Thomas Holt moved to the window, peering out. "Something's spooking the horses," he said. Briggs ignored him, his attention fixed on Eleanor. "I think it's time for the truth, Mrs. Harding. The boy's been here, hasn't he?" Before Eleanor could answer, the cabin door burst open. A man stood framed in the doorway, Marcus Freeman, Thornwood's only doctor, and one of the few people Eleanor might call a friend. "Eleanor, I was passing by and—" Freeman stopped short, taking in the scene before him. His eyes flicked from the militiamen to Eleanor's tense face, understanding dawning immediately. "What's happening here?" Briggs turned, visibly annoyed at the interruption. "Official militia business, Doctor. Nothing that concerns you." Freeman stepped fully into the cabin, closing the door behind him. In his 50s, with silver-streaked hair and a dignified bearing that commanded respect even from men like Briggs, he was one of the most educated men in the county. When armed men invade a widow's home, it becomes the concern of any decent neighbor, Freeman said evenly, especially when that widow is a friend. "We're conducting a search for a fugitive," Briggs said, "as is our right." "With a warrant, I presume?" Freeman asked, arching an eyebrow. Briggs's expression darkened. "We don't need papers to track Indians disrupting the legal relocations. Governor Gilmer himself has authorized the militia to act as necessary." "Interesting interpretation of the law," Freeman remarked. He moved to stand beside Eleanor, a silent show of support that nearly broke her carefully maintained composure. "Have you found this fugitive you seek?" "Not yet," Briggs admitted, "but we have reason to believe Mrs. Harding has had contact with him." He held up the deerskin pouch. Freeman barely glanced at it. "I gave Eleanor that pouch myself, filled with medicinal herbs for her headaches. A patient of mine, a converted Cherokee who attends Reverend Miller's church in Thornwood, crafted it as payment for services I rendered to his family." The lie was delivered with such smooth conviction that even Eleanor almost believed it. Briggs's certainty visibly faltered. "The boy's wounded," he insisted. "He'd seek medical help." "If he's wounded, perhaps you should be looking for him rather than harassing Eleanor," Freeman suggested. "The boy could be miles from here by now, possibly dying from infection if the wound is serious." Briggs hesitated, clearly reassessing the situation. The presence of the respected doctor had changed the dynamic, introducing a potential witness who could cause problems if Briggs overstepped. "Check the cellar," he finally ordered Lewis. Eleanor's heart sank. She caught Freeman's questioning glance and gave an almost imperceptible nod. His eyes widened slightly, but his expression remained composed. "There is no cellar," Freeman said confidently. "Only a small root storage space. William Harding built this cabin on solid ground. Everyone in Thornwood knows that." Lewis paused, looking to Briggs for confirmation. Briggs frowned, scanning the floor. "Where's the access, then?" "There isn't one," Eleanor stated firmly. "Dr. Freeman is correct. I store my vegetables in the shed out back. Feel free to check." It was a gamble. If they insisted on finding the trapdoor, they eventually would. But creating doubt might be enough to divert their attention. The gamble paid off. After a moment's consideration, Briggs gestured for Lewis to check the shed instead. As Lewis departed, Briggs turned back to Eleanor. "If I find you've lied to a militia officer, the consequences will be severe," he warned. "Harboring Cherokee fugitives is a serious offense." "I'm aware of the law, Mr. Briggs," Eleanor replied. "As is Dr. Freeman, I'm sure." Freeman nodded gravely. "Indeed, I'm also aware that trespassing and harassment carry their own penalties. I'd be happy to discuss these legal nuances with Judge Patterson next time I'm in Augusta. He's been a patient of mine for years." The mention of the circuit judge, known for his strict interpretation of property rights, wasn't lost on Briggs. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing as Lewis returned from the shed. "Just vegetables and tools," Lewis reported. "No sign of disturbance." Briggs surveyed the cabin one final time, his suspicions still evident, but now tempered with uncertainty. "We'll be moving on," he announced. "But we'll be watching the trails, Mrs. Harding. If you spot any sign of Cherokee in these parts, you're duty-bound to report it." "I understand my civic obligations," Eleanor said neutrally. With visible reluctance, Briggs placed the deerskin pouch back on the table. The militiamen filed out, mounting their horses with the practiced ease of men who lived in the saddle. Eleanor and Freeman stood on the porch, watching as they rode away, disappearing into the tree line to the south. Only when they were completely out of sight did Eleanor let her shoulders slump, the tension draining from her body. "Thank you," she whispered to Freeman. "Your timing was miraculous." "Hardly miraculous," Freeman replied quietly. "Nancy at the general store mentioned Briggs and his men were heading this way. I made an educated guess about their purpose." He looked at her seriously. "Now, where is the boy?" Eleanor hesitated only briefly before moving back inside. She pulled away the rug and lifted the trap door. "You can come out now," she called softly. "They're gone." For a moment, there was no response. Then slowly, Tsali emerged from the darkness, climbing the ladder with cautious movements. He froze when he saw Freeman, hand instinctively moving to the knife at his waist. "It's all right," Eleanor assured him. "Dr. Freeman is a friend. He helped send them away." Freeman regarded the Cherokee boy with professional interest, his eyes immediately noting the bandaged arm. "You've done a good job with that wound," he told Eleanor, then shifted his gaze to Sally. "I'm Marcus Freeman. I'm a doctor. Would you allow me to check your arm?" Sally looked to Eleanor for guidance. When she nodded encouragingly, he reluctantly extended his injured arm toward Freeman. The doctor examined the wound carefully, unwrapping Eleanor's bandages and inspecting her stitching. "Clean work," he commented. "No signs of infection. You've been taught well, Eleanor." "My grandmother," she explained simply. Freeman rewrapped the arm with fresh bandages from his medical bag. "The wound is healing nicely, but he'll need to keep it clean and rested for at least another week." "A week we may not have," Eleanor said, glancing toward the window. "Briggs will be back." "He's not convinced," Freeman nodded grimly. "No, he's not. And he's not a man who gives up easily." He sat down at the table, gesturing for Eleanor and Tsali to join him. "We need to consider your options carefully." Tsali, who had remained silent throughout the examination, finally spoke. "I must find my father," he said. "He searched for me, for my mother, and for my sister." "Your father," Freeman repeated thoughtfully. "The boy mentioned a name to me," Eleanor explained. "Niganegi. He said he's the war chief of their clan." Freeman's expression changed subtly. "Niganegi," he repeated. "I've heard stories. A respected leader among the mountain Cherokee, one of the few who've successfully evaded the relocation parties." He turned to Tsali. "Do you know where your father might be looking for you?" The boy hesitated, then pointed northward. "Sacred Mountain, meeting place if separated." "Blood Mountain?" Freeman asked. When Sally nodded, the doctor exhaled slowly. "That's at least 3 days' journey from here, through difficult terrain." "I can go," Sally insisted. arm is stronger now. Eleanor shook her head. Not alone. Briggs and his men are watching the trails, and there are others like them patrolling the mountains. A heavy silence fell over the cabin as they considered the dilemma. Eleanor gazed out the window at the forested hills that stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere in those mountains, a Cherokee war chief was searching for his son, a boy now dependent on her protection. "He can't stay here," Freeman finally said, voicing what they all knew. "Briggs suspects too much already. He'll return with more men, perhaps a proper search warrant. Next time, I may not arrive in time to intervene." "Then what do you suggest?" Eleanor asked, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Freeman considered for a moment. "I need to return to Thornwood today. I have patients who can't wait. But I can spread the word that I treated you for a cut hand, confirming your story." He turned to Sally. "You need to remain hidden for at least another day to regain your strength." Then he trailed off, clearly uncertain about the next step. "I'll take him," Eleanor said suddenly, surprising even herself. "I know these mountains almost as well as the Cherokee. I can guide him to Blood Mountain." Freeman stared at her in astonishment. "Eleanor, that's—" "The only way," she finished. Firmly. "Briggs won't stop searching. The boy can't make it alone in his condition, and I won't simply turn him out to be captured or killed." "It's too dangerous," Freeman protested. "If you're caught aiding a Cherokee fugitive, then I'll—" "Face those consequences," Eleanor interrupted. "What's the alternative? Send him off alone to die in the woods. Hand him over to Briggs." She shook her head decisively. "I've made my choice." Sally watched this exchange with solemn eyes. When Eleanor finished speaking, he reached across the table and touched her hand lightly, a gesture of gratitude that needed no translation. Freeman sighed deeply, recognizing the futility of further argument. "You always were as stubborn as your husband," he said, though there was a note of admiration in his voice. "If this is truly your decision, then at least let me help you prepare." He opened his medical bag and removed several packets of herbs. "For pain and fever if needed," he explained, placing them on the table. "And I'll bring supplies tonight, food, bandages, perhaps a better map of the northern trails." "Thank you," Eleanor said sincerely. As Freeman prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "what you're doing, it's right by any moral standard, but it places you beyond the protection of the law. You understand that?" Eleanor nodded. "Some laws deserve to be broken," she said simply. After Freeman departed, Eleanor set about making preparations for their journey. She gathered warm clothing, dried food, a water skin, flint and steel, and her husband's old hunting knife. Throughout the afternoon, Charlie watched her work, occasionally offering suggestions in his limited English or demonstrating with gestures when words failed. By evening, a small pack was prepared, containing only the essentials they could carry without being slowed down. Eleanor had decided they would leave before dawn, using the darkness as cover to slip away unnoticed. The most direct route to Blood Mountain would take them through rugged terrain, away from settlements and the main trails where militia patrols might be encountered. As darkness fell, Eleanor sat by the fire staring into the flames. The enormity of what she had committed to was beginning to sink in. She would be leaving behind the home she had shared with William, the life she had built for herself after his death, all to help a Cherokee boy find his father, a man who was, by the government's definition, an enemy. "You're afraid," Charlie observed, sitting cross-legged on the floor nearby. Eleanor looked up, surprised by his perception. "Yes," she admitted, "but fear doesn't mean we shouldn't act." Charlie nodded thoughtfully. "My father says courage is not absence of fear. It is action despite fear." "Your father and I might agree on more than people would expect," Eleanor said with a small smile. As they prepared for sleep, A soft knock at the door startled them both. Eleanor reached for her rifle, gesturing for Tsali to hide. But when she cautiously opened the door, it was only Freeman, returning as promised with a small sack of supplies. "I've brought what I could without arousing suspicion," he said, stepping inside and setting the sack on the table. "Food, medicine, a better map." He hesitated, then reached into his coat and withdrew a small pistol. "And this, it was my father's. Small enough to conceal, but it might make the difference if you encounter trouble." Eleanor accepted the weapon with a nod of thanks. She had never owned a pistol before, having relied on her rifle for hunting and protection, but the smaller firearm would be easier to carry on their journey. "There's one more thing you should know," Freeman said, his expression grave. "Briggs has called in reinforcements from Augusta. A full militia detachment is expected within 2 days. They're setting up checkpoints on all the main roads leading north." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "How many men?" "At least 20, from what I heard. They're determined to prevent any more Cherokee from escaping into the mountains. This news made their departure even more urgent. If they didn't leave by morning, their path might be blocked entirely." "We'll be gone before they arrive," Eleanor assured him. "Northwest through Raven Gorge, then along the ridge to avoid the main trails." Freeman nodded approval of the route. "It's a wise choice. Difficult terrain, but less chance of encounter." He turned to Tsali. "Your father is a fortunate man to have such a brave son." The boy straightened at these words, a flash of pride momentarily replacing the wariness in his eyes. After Freeman left, promising to create a diversion in town the next day to occupy Briggs's attention, Eleanor and Tsali completed their preparations. In silence, as they settled down to sleep, Eleanor in her bed, Tsali on his pallet near the fire, the weight of the coming journey hung in the air between them. "Eleanor," Tsali said suddenly, just as she was about to extinguish the lamp. "Thank you." Those 2 simple words, spoken with such earnest gratitude, confirmed for Eleanor that she had made the right choice, regardless of the danger ahead. In a world that had grown increasingly harsh and divided, this small act of humanity felt like the only path she could follow with a clear conscience. "Rest now," she told him gently. "Tomorrow we will find your father." As darkness embraced the cabin, Eleanor's thoughts turned to the mountains that awaited them, and to the Cherokee war chief somewhere in those ancient forests, a man whose path would soon intersect with hers in ways she could not yet imagine. The forest before dawn was a different world, all shadow and whisper, alive with sounds that daylight silenced. Eleanor moved through it with practiced caution, Tsali close behind. They had left the cabin an hour before sunrise, slipping away under a sky still thick with stars. Eleanor carried a small pack with their provisions, the pistol Freeman had given her tucked securely at her waist. Her rifle was slung across her back, too valuable to leave behind, despite its weight. Tsali wore William's old hunting jacket, the sleeves rolled up and cinched with twine. It hung large on his small frame, but would provide warmth in the increasingly cool autumn nights. They followed a dry creek bed north, keeping to the lowest ground where the trees grew thickest. No words passed between them, sound carried far. In the stillness of early morning, occasionally Eleanor would pause, listening for any indication they were being followed. Each time, she heard nothing but the natural rhythm of the forest, wind through leaves, the distant call of an owl returning to roost, the soft rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. By mid-morning, they had covered nearly 5 miles, climbing steadily into higher country, where pines began to replace the oak and hickory of the lower elevation. Only then did Eleanor call a brief halt, finding a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock face where they could rest and take water without being easily spotted. "How's your arm?" she asked quietly, watching as Tsali flexed his injured shoulder. "It pulls," he admitted, "but does not tear." Eleanor nodded, satisfied with his honest assessment. We need to cover at least 10 more miles today. The farther we get from settlements, the safer we'll be." Charlie scanned the forest around them, his gaze settling on a distant ridgeline. "Raven Gorge there," he said, pointing. "Beyond, my people's hunting grounds begin." "Is it safe?" Eleanor asked. The boy considered this. "Safer than white man's land, but militia sometimes follow." His expression darkened. "They burn our empty villages, take what we left behind." Eleanor had heard rumors of such actions. Abandoned Cherokee homesteads looted and destroyed, crops burned, livestock slaughtered or stolen, the systematic erasure of a people's presence from the land they had inhabited for generations. "We'll be careful," she promised. "Dr. Freeman's map shows a route through the gorge that avoids the main trail." They continued their journey, the terrain growing steadily more challenging. The gentle slopes of Oakwood Valley gave way to steeper inclines, rocky outcroppings, and dense thickets of mountain laurel that tore at their clothing. Charlie moved through it all with the innate grace of someone born to this landscape, occasionally pausing to guide Eleanor along easier paths she might have missed. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered over the mountains, promising rain before nightfall. They pushed on, reaching the entrance to Raven Gorge just as the first heavy drops began to fall. The gorge was a narrow passage between towering rock walls, carved by centuries of flowing water. Now, in the dry autumn season, only a thin stream trickled along its base, leaving room to walk alongside. "We need shelter for the night," Eleanor said, eyeing the darkening sky. "Somewhere dry?" Charlie nodded, taking the lead. He moved with greater confidence now, in territory he clearly recognized. After a quarter-mile, he veered away from the stream, climbing a steep embankment and pushing through a curtain of vines. Eleanor followed, discovering a small cave entrance hidden behind the vegetation. "My people use it when hunting," Charlie explained. "Dry place, safe." The cave extended about 15 feet into the mountain, high enough to stand comfortably and wide enough for several people to sleep. Previous occupants had left a small circle of stones for a fire pit, and dry wood was stacked in one corner. "Perfect," Eleanor said with genuine relief. The temperature had dropped with the rain, and her clothes were already damp. "We'll rest here for the night." They built a small fire, keeping it low to minimize smoke that might be visible from outside. Charlie arranged branches and pine boughs across the cave entrance, creating a screen that would hide their firelight while still allowing smoke to escape. His survival skills impressed Eleanor, reminding her that despite his youth, he had been raised in traditions that honored such knowledge. As they shared a simple meal of jerky, dried apples, and cornbread, the storm outside intensified. Rain lashed at the mountainside, and thunder rolled through the gorge, amplified by its rocky walls. Eleanor found herself grateful for the cave's solid protection, wondering if they would have found it without Charlie's familiarity with the area. "How far is Blood Mountain?" she asked as they finished eating. Charlie considered. 2 days, maybe 3, depends on weather, on soldiers." "And your father, will he still be there?" "It's been several days since you were separated." "He waits," Charlie said with absolute certainty, "until the moon is full again. Promise we made." The full moon was still a week away, Eleanor calculated. If they could reach Blood Mountain within 3 days, there should be time to find Niganegi, assuming he had made it there himself. "What will your father do when he finds you?" she asked. "Where will you go?" Charlie's expression grew solemn. "North, maybe, where soldiers don't follow. Some Cherokee hide in the highest mountains, build new villages." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. "Or fight. Some bands fight." Eleanor understood the implication. Cherokee resistance had been sporadic but fierce in some areas, led by chiefs who refused to accept the government's removal policies. If Niganegi was indeed a war chief, he might well be organizing such resistance. "And your mother and sister?" Do you think they're still being held by Briggs's men? Charlie's face hardened. If alive, taken west on Trail of Tears. His voice caught slightly on the Cherokee term for the forced relocation, the trail where many had already died from exposure, disease, and heartbreak. I'm sorry, Eleanor said softly, recognizing the inadequacy of the words even as she spoke them. They fell silent, listening to the storm's fury gradually subside into a steady rainfall. Eleanor added wood to the fire, building it just high enough to ward off the growing chill. As the flames flickered across his features, Charlie looked younger, the hardness momentarily replaced by the vulnerability of a child separated from his family, clinging to hope that they might somehow be reunited. You should sleep, Eleanor told him. I'll keep watch for a while. Charlie nodded, wrapping himself in the blanket they had brought. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep, exhaustion, overcoming caution. Eleanor sat with her back against the cave wall, rifle across her lap, listening to the rain and thinking about the path that had led her to this moment. 4 years ago, her life had seemed settled. She and William had built their cabin, cleared, land for crops, planned for children who never came. His death had left her adrift, living day to day without purpose beyond basic survival. Now, improbably, she found herself fleeing into the mountains with a Cherokee boy, pursued by militia, guided by nothing more than a sense that this was the right thing to do. Somewhere in the night, she drifted into sleep herself, only to be woken suddenly by Charlie's hand on her shoulder. He pressed a finger to his lips, then pointed toward the cave entrance. Eleanor listened intently. Beneath the softer patter of continuing rainfall, she heard it. Voices. Men's voices. Approaching along the gorge. Udijil must have taken shelter somewhere nearby, one voice said, barely audible over the rain. No one travels this gorge in weather like this without stopping. Check the caves, another voice ordered. They can't have gotten far with the boy. Wounded. Briggs. Eleanor recognized his distinctive drawl immediately. Her blood ran cold at the realization. They had been followed after all, despite their precautions. Charlie had already begun gathering their belongings, moving with silent efficiency. Eleanor doused the fire with the remains of their drinking water, plunging the cave into darkness. Her eyes, adjusted to the firelight, could now see nothing, but she felt Charlie tugging at her sleeve, guiding her toward the rear of the cave. Back way, he whispered so softly she could barely hear him even inches away. Small tunnel, follow me. Eleanor had assumed the cave was a simple shelter, but Charlie led her to what felt like a narrow crevice in the back wall. She hesitated. The opening seemed barely wide enough for a child, let alone a grown woman. Trust, Charlie urged, already slipping into the gap. The voices outside grew louder. Flashlight beams swept across the vine curtain covering the cave entrance, illuminating the interior in brief, terrifying flashes. Eleanor made her decision, squeezing into the crevice after Charlie. The passage was tight, painfully so around her shoulders, but navigable. She inched forward on hands and knees, following the sound of Charlie's movement ahead. The rough stone scraped her palms and tore at her skirt, but she pushed on, desperate to put distance between themselves and Briggs's men. After what felt like an eternity, the passage widened slightly. Eleanor felt a cool draft on her face and realized they must be approaching another exit. Sure enough, moments later, Charlie helped her emerge onto a narrow ledge halfway up the gorge wall, concealed from below by an outcropping of rock. Rain still fell, but softer now, more mist than downpour. In the faint moonlight breaking through the clouds, Eleanor could see the gorge floor 20 feet below. Flashlight beams moved along it like fireflies, accompanied by the splash of boots through shallow water. "They're searching the main trail," she whispered. Charlie nodded, pointing upward along a nearly invisible path that hugged the gorge wall. "We climb, go around. The path was treacherous in the dark and rain, barely wide enough for single-file travel, and slippery with wet moss and loose stones. Eleanor followed Sally, placing her feet exactly where he placed his, gripping rock outcroppings. For balance, one misstep would send them tumbling to the gorge floor, or worse, onto the rocks that lined parts of the stream below. They ascended gradually, the path eventually leading out of the gorge onto a forested ridge above. From this vantage point, they could see flashlights still moving in the gorge beneath them, but the militia men showed no sign of discovering their escape route. "We go," Sally said, already moving northward along the ridgeline. "No stopping until daylight." Eleanor understood the necessity. They had lost their fire, their shelter, and much of their planned route. Now they would have to travel through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and their pursuers. The next few hours passed in a grueling blur of steep climbs, dense underbrush, and near falls on unseen obstacles. Sally set a punishing pace, his knowledge of the terrain their only advantage. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, Eleanor's muscles burned with fatigue, and her hands were raw from catching herself on tree trunks and rocks. They finally stopped at a small spring burbling from between moss-covered boulders. Both drank deeply, then filled their water skin. Sally surveyed their surroundings with a critical eye. "Cherokee hunting camp near," he said. "Half-day's walk, maybe find help there." "Will they welcome us?" Eleanor asked, uncertain how she, a white woman, would be received. "Some Cherokees still trust some white people," Sally replied. "Dr. Freeman has Cherokee friends. You help me, they will see." It wasn't a guarantee, but it was their best option. They continued forward, the terrain becoming increasingly unfamiliar to Eleanor. They were deep in Cherokee territory now, following game trails that wound through ancient forests untouched by settler axes. The trees here were giants, some wide enough that 3 men with outstretched arms could not encircle them. Sunlight filtered through their canopy in dappled patterns, creating an atmosphere almost cathedral-like in its solemn beauty. By midday, they reached a swift-flowing stream too wide to jump across. Sally led them to a crossing point where large stones created natural stepping places. As they reached the far bank, he suddenly froze, one hand raised in warning. Eleanor stopped listening. At first, she heard nothing unusual, just the gurgle of water over stones and the rustle of wind in leaves. Then she caught it, a soft, melodic whistle, not the song of any bird she recognized. It came from their right, somewhere in the thick undergrowth beside the stream. Sally whistled back, a similar pattern with subtle differences. The bushes parted, and a young Cherokee man stepped out, bow in hand, arrow nocked but pointed downward. He wore buckskin leggings and a faded cotton shirt that had once been white, now dyed the mottled browns and greens of the forest. His black hair was tied back with a leather thong, and a single eagle feather hung from the band. He and Sally exchanged rapid words in Cherokee, the older man's expression shifting from suspicion to surprise to guarded acceptance. Finally, he turned his attention to Eleanor, dark eyes assessing her with unnerving intensity. "I am Adahi," he said in heavily accented English. "Sally says you save him from soldiers. Treat his wound." Eleanor nodded. "My name is Eleanor Harding. I found him injured and couldn't turn him away." Adahi considered this, then spoke again to Sally in Cherokee. The boy responded earnestly, gesturing toward his bandaged arm and then to Eleanor. Whatever he said appeared to satisfy Adahi, who finally lowered his bow completely. "You come," he said to Eleanor. "Camp not far. Others must decide about you." They followed Adahi upstream for nearly a mile, then veered inland along a trail Eleanor would never have noticed without a guide. It led to a small clearing nestled in a fold of the hills, where 5 hide-covered shelters formed a rough circle around a central fire pit. Women worked at various tasks, grinding corn, scraping hides, weaving baskets, while children played. Nearby, all activity ceased as the newcomers entered the clearing. This was no permanent village, Eleanor realized, but a temporary camp for those who had evaded the removal, a small band living on the move, using hunting camps and seasonal sites to avoid detection. Perhaps 20 people in all, they possessed only what they could carry or create from the forest around them. An older man emerged from the largest shelter, his face deeply lined, his bearing dignified despite the simple clothing he wore. A complex tattoo covered one half of his chest, visible through his open vest. He spoke first to Adahi, then to Tsali, his tone questioning but not hostile. Tsali responded respectfully, occasionally gesturing toward Eleanor. She stood quietly, aware of all eyes upon her, some curious, some fearful, some openly distrustful. She could hardly blame them. White faces had brought nothing but suffering to these people in recent years. Finally, the elder turned to her. "I am Sequani," he said in better English than Adahi had spoken. "Tsali tells me you risked much to help him, that soldiers came to your home, but you did not give him up." "It was the right thing to do," Eleanor said simply. Sequani studied her face as if searching for deception. "Few white people think helping the Cherokee is the right thing now." "Few, perhaps, but some," Eleanor replied. "My friend Dr. Freeman in Thornwood helps Cherokee patients despite the risks. There are others who disagree with the removals, though not enough to stop them." "Why do you help?" The question was direct, challenging. Eleanor considered her answer carefully. "Because Sali needed help, because what's happening to your people is wrong, and because doing nothing when faced with injustice makes one complicit in it." Sequani translated her words for those who didn't understand English. There were murmurs among the group, some skeptical, some approving. An older woman stepped forward, saying something to Sequani while looking at Eleanor. He nodded. "Adsila says you will eat with us," Sequani informed Eleanor. "Then we talk more about helping you find Niganegi." The meal was simple. Corn cakes, dried berries, and a stew of wild greens and rabbit, but given generously. Eleanor sat with Sali near the fire, aware of the continuing scrutiny from the camp's residents. Children, initially shy, gradually edged closer, fascinated by her light brown hair and the unfamiliar cut of her clothing. One small girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, finally approached directly, reaching out to touch Eleanor's hair with gentle curiosity. Eleanor smiled at her, and after a moment's hesitation the child smiled back, a bridge of understanding that needed no words. After the meal, Sequani called Eleanor and Sali to his shelter. Inside, away from prying eyes, his manner became more urgent. "Niganegi is Sali's father," he confirmed, "a great war chief of the Wolf Clan. If the boy reaches him, it will give our people hope." "You know where he is?" Eleanor asked. Sequani nodded. "Blood Mountain, yes. But the path is watched. Militia patrols on all main trails since 2 days. Go, they hunt not just for Tsali now, but for all Cherokee who resist." "Then we need a different route," Eleanor said. "There is one," Sequani replied. "Through Mist Valley, then up the eastern face of Blood Mountain. Difficult climb, but no. Soldiers there. Too steep, too dangerous for horses." "Can you guide us?" Eleanor asked. Sequani shook his head. "I must stay with these people. They depend on me." He turned to Adahi, who had joined them silently. "But Adahi knows the way. He is Niganegi's nephew. Sali's cousin. He will take you." Adahi nodded once, his expression solemn. "We leave at first light tomorrow. Rest tonight. Safe here." That night, Eleanor slept in Adsila's shelter, wrapped in warm furs on a bed of fragrant pine boughs. For the first time since leaving her cabin, she felt momentarily secure, surrounded by people who, if not entirely trusting, at least accepted her presence. Tsali, reunited with members of his extended family, seemed more at ease as well, though his determination to find his father remained unwavering. Before dawn, Adsila woke Eleanor with a gentle touch. The older woman had prepared a small pack for her, a deerskin bag containing pemmican, dried corn, and healing herbs. She pressed it into Eleanor's hands, saying something in Cherokee that needed no translation. Her eyes conveyed both gratitude and concern. Adahi was waiting outside, bow and quiver across his back, a long knife at his belt. Charlie stood nearby, having exchanged William's oversized jacket for proper Cherokee buckskins provided by the camp. His wounded arm was freshly bandaged, and he carried a small pack of his own. "Ready?" Adahi asked simply. Eleanor nodded, slinging her rifle across her back. The weight felt familiar now, almost reassuring. "Ready." They departed as the first light of dawn crept over the eastern ridges, moving swiftly and silently through the awakening forest. Adahi set a steady pace, leading them along hidden paths that wound through thickets and across rocky slopes. By mid-morning, they had climbed high enough to look back across a vast expanse of wilderness, rolling mountains, covered in autumn-painted forests, with no sign of human habitation as far as the eye could see. "Beautiful," Eleanor murmured. "Cherokee land," Adahi said beside her, "since time before memory. Now they say not ours." His voice held no self-pity, only a deep sense of injustice. They continued upward, the terrain growing increasingly difficult. In places, the path narrowed to mere inches along sheer rock faces. Eleanor found herself crawling on hands and knees, more than once, fighting vertigo as she glimpsed the dizzying drops below. Charlie and Adahi moved with more confidence, their moccasined feet finding purchase where Eleanor's boots slipped. By late afternoon, they reached Mist Valley, a narrow depression between mountain ridges perpetually filled with swirling fog from the hot springs that bubbled up from the earth. The mist provided welcome concealment, but made navigation treacherous. Adahi led them through it by memory, occasionally pausing to verify their direction, using landmarks visible only to his experienced eye. As they emerged from the valley onto higher ground, Adahi suddenly halted, raising one hand for silence. He cocked his head, listening intently, then quickly pulled Eleanor and Charlie behind a large boulder. "Voices," he whispered. "Militia patrol." Now Eleanor heard it too, men's voices carrying clearly in the mountain air, somewhere up the trail ahead. She peered cautiously around the boulder's edge. Perhaps a quarter-mile above them, a group of 5 or 6 men in militia uniforms picked their way along the mountainside, rifles in hand. "How did they find this trail?" she whispered. "Cherokee guide," Adahi said grimly. "Some betray their own people for food, for safety promises." They waited in tense silence as the patrol moved slowly along the ridge. If the men turned downhill, they would inevitably cross paths. But after what seemed an eternity, the patrol continued upward, eventually disappearing over the ridgeline. "We go another way now," Adahi decided. "Night climb, more dangerous, but no soldiers." As darkness fell, they began the most challenging portion of their journey, a steep ascent up a nearly vertical face of Blood Mountain. They climbed by moonlight, finding handholds on rocky outcroppings and exposed tree roots. Adahi led, testing each step before signaling the others to follow. Charlie came next, his smaller size allowing him to slip through narrow passages more easily. Eleanor brought up the rear, her fingers raw and arms trembling with fatigue, as the climb stretched on. Near midnight, they finally reached a relatively flat area, a small plateau jutting from the mountainside. Adahi called a halt, allowing them to rest for the first time in hours. "How much farther?" Eleanor asked, massaging her aching shoulders. "Meeting place just below the summit," Adahi replied. "We reach by morning." They rested briefly, sharing water and pemmican in silence. The moon hung full and bright above them, illuminating the vast wilderness stretching in all directions. From this height, Eleanor could see for miles, mountain ranges rolling like frozen waves toward the horizon. The beauty was breathtaking, but she felt a pang of sorrow, knowing that this ancient homeland was being systematically taken from those who had called it their own for countless generations. The final portion of their climb began as the eastern sky showed the first hints of approaching dawn. They crested a ridge and found themselves on a broad, flat expanse near the mountain's summit. Ancient oaks grew here, their massive trunks testifying to centuries of life. In the center of this natural clearing stood a circle of standing stones, not placed by human hands, but natural formations weathered by time into sentinels around an open space. Adahi approached reverently, touching his forehead in a gesture of respect. "Sacred place," he explained quietly, "meeting place for many generations. If Niganegi is on a mountain, he will come here." They settled at the edge of the clearing to wait, hidden among the trees. The rising sun painted the horizon in fiery hues, gradually illuminating the stone circle with golden light. Birds began their morning songs, and a gentle breeze stirred the oak leaves overhead. Despite her exhaustion, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep, too aware of the significance of this moment. For Tsali, for herself, for the journey that had brought them here. Hours passed with no sign of Niganegi or any other Cherokee. Adahi remained patient, explaining that the war chief would approach cautiously, watching for signs of a trap before revealing himself. Tsali alternated between anxious pacing and silent watchfulness, his eyes constantly scanning the surrounding forest. As midday approached, Adahi suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to his knife. "Someone comes," he whispered. Eleanor listened but heard nothing unusual. Then, almost imperceptibly, she became aware of a presence, a sense of being watched, that raised the hair on the back of her neck. She turned slowly, scanning the forest edge, and caught a flicker of movement among the shadows. A figure emerged from the trees opposite their position. A tall, powerfully built Cherokee man dressed in buckskins, a rifle held easily in one hand. His black hair was tied back, decorated with 2 eagle feathers, and blue and red paint marked his cheekbones in patterns that matched the tattoo visible on his chest, where his hunting shirt lay open. His face was stern, weathered by years and hardship, but his eyes, as he caught sight of Tsali, sparked with unmistakable emotion. "Father!" Tsali's cry broke the silence as he rushed forward. Niganegi lowered his rifle, opening one arm to receive. His son in a fierce embrace. They spoke rapidly in Cherokee, Tsali's words tumbling out in a rush, while his father listened intently, one hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. Adahi approached more formally, greeting Niganegi with obvious respect. The war chief clasped his nephew's arm in greeting, then turned his attention to Eleanor, who had remained at the edge of the clearing, uncertain of her place in this reunion. Niganegi said something to Adahi, who translated, "He asks, who is this white woman who risked her life to save his son?" Eleanor stepped forward, meeting Niganegi's unwavering gaze. "My name is Eleanor Harding," she said simply. "I found Tsali wounded and couldn't turn him away. That's all." Adahi translated her words. Niganegi listened, his expression unreadable, then spoke again at length. "He says what you call that's all is what his people call honor," Adahi translated. "He says in days when most white faces bring death to Cherokee, you brought life. This creates a debt that cannot be measured or forgotten." Eleanor shook her head. "There is no debt. I did what any person with conscience should do." When these words were translated, a rare smile briefly crossed Niganegi's face. He spoke again, more directly to Eleanor this time. He asks, "What will you do now?" Adahi said. "Return to your cabin. Militia will be watching for you there. They will know you helped Tsali escape." Eleanor had considered this during their journey, but had been too focused on reaching their destination to dwell on what would come after. Now, the reality confronted her. She could not simply return to her life in Oakwood Valley. Briggs and his men would be waiting. At best, she faced arrest and imprisonment. At worst, the summary justice sometimes dealt to Indian sympathizers. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go home, but I have nowhere else to go." Niganegi listened to the translation, then spoke again, his voice deep and resolute. "He says," Adahi translated, "that paths sometimes cross for reasons beyond our understanding, that perhaps the spirits have brought you here for purpose neither Cherokee nor white people can yet see." Sali stepped forward then, saying something earnestly to his father. Niganegi considered his son's words, looking between Sali and Eleanor with thoughtful eyes. Finally, he nodded once and spoke directly to Eleanor in careful, accented English. "My son says you are now part of his story. So you must become part of our story too." It was an invitation, or perhaps something more. An acknowledgement that their fates had become intertwined in ways none of them could have foreseen 5 days earlier, when Eleanor had found a wounded boy in her root cellar and made a choice that would alter the course of all their lives. As the sun reached its zenith above Blood Mountain, Eleanor stood at a crossroads between the world she had known and one she could scarcely imagine. Behind her lay the settled life of a widow in a cabin at the edge of civilization. Before her stretched an unknown path alongside people fighting to preserve their very existence in a land that had once been unquestionably theirs. In that moment of decision, with Sali looking at her hopefully, and Niganegi waiting with quiet dignity, Eleanor recognized that some choices once made create ripples that cannot be contained. Her decision to help one wounded boy had set in motion events that now offered her a different life entirely, one with purpose beyond mere survival. "I would be honored," she said finally, "to be part of your story." Niganegi nodded once, satisfaction, and perhaps something like respect in his dark eyes. He touched his chest, then gestured to the surrounding mountains. "Then welcome, Eleanor Harding, to what remains of our world." Life among Niganegi's band began as a series of adjustments for Eleanor. The small group, 37 Cherokee who had evaded the removal forces, lived in constant movement, rarely staying in one location more than a few days. Their encampments were designed to be dismantled quickly, leaving minimal evidence of their presence. They traveled light, carrying only what was essential for survival and what held cultural significance, too precious to abandon. Eleanor's first weeks were a blur of new experiences. She learned to construct a temporary shelter using nothing more than pine boughs and rawhide. She discovered which plants could be eaten and which had medicinal properties. She practiced moving through the forest in silence, placing each foot with deliberate care to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. Sali remained her constant companion, his initial guardedness giving way to an easy familiarity. He took obvious pride in teaching her Cherokee words and customs, patiently correcting her pronunciation and explaining the significance behind various traditions. In turn, she tended his wounded arm, which healed steadily under her care until he could draw a bow again without pain. Niganegi maintained a certain distance, observing Eleanor with thoughtful eyes but rarely engaging her directly. As the band's leader, his focus remained on their collective survival, finding safe routes through the mountains, organizing hunting parties, sending scouts to gather information about militia movements. When he did speak to her, it was with respect but reserve, as if still measuring her place among them. Others in the group varied in their acceptance. The children welcomed her without hesitation, fascinated by her different appearance and the stories she told them in the evenings. Some adults, particularly those who had lost family members to militia violence, regarded her with lingering suspicion. But the majority came to accept her presence with cautious openness, recognizing that she had risked everything to help Tsali. Adsila, the older woman from Sequani's camp, who had given Eleanor provisions, joined them a week after the reunion on Blood Mountain. She took Eleanor under her wing, teaching her practical skills, how to tan hides, weave baskets from river cane, prepare meals from whatever the forest provided. Under Adsila's patient guidance, Eleanor's hands grew more calloused, but also more capable. "You learn fast," Adsila observed one afternoon as they worked together preparing a deer hide. "Most white women are too proud to get their hands dirty this way." "I've never had the luxury of pride," Eleanor replied, scraping the hide with a bone tool. "When William died, I learned to do everything myself, or go hungry." Adsila nodded approvingly. "Good preparation for this life. Here, everyone works, or everyone suffers." As autumn deepened toward winter, the band moved to lower elevations, where game was more plentiful and shelter from the coming cold more readily available. They established a semi-permanent winter camp in a hidden valley protected by steep ridges on three sides. The location offered natural hot springs for warmth, caves for storage, and multiple escape routes should militia patrols discover them. Here they constructed more substantial lodges, dome-shaped structures of bent saplings covered with hides, bark and pine boughs, each large enough to house a family. A central council fire burned day and night, tended in shifts to ensure it never went out during the winter months. Eleanor worked alongside the others, contributing what skills she possessed. Her knowledge of treating wounds proved valuable when 2 hunters returned injured from an encounter with a black bear. Her experience preserving food helped extend their winter stores. Even her ability to read and write found purpose. She began teaching interested children and adults, using charcoal on birch bark in place of pen and paper. One evening in early December, as snow fell softly outside the lodge she now shared with Adsila and 2 other women, Niganegi came to speak with her. He sat cross-legged by the small fire, his normally stern features softened by its light. "My son tells me you have been teaching our children the white man's words," he said in his accented English. Eleanor nodded, uncertain whether this was a criticism or merely an observation. "Only those who wish to learn. I thought it might be useful for them to understand the language of—" She hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. "Of those who take our land," Niganegi finished for her. "Yes, knowledge is both a weapon and shield." He studied her face in the firelight. "You have been with us now for 7 weeks. You work hard, you do not complain, you learn our ways." "Your people have been kind enough to accept me," Eleanor said. "I try to earn my place among you." Niganegi nodded thoughtfully. "Tomorrow is an important day. Council of Elders meets to discuss winter plans, to make decisions for all our people. I would like you to attend." Eleanor blinked in surprise. The council was typically closed to all, but the most respected members of the band. "Are you sure that's appropriate? I'm not Cherokee." "You are not Cherokee by blood," Niganegi agreed, "but you have a Cherokee heart. You see injustice and stand against it, even at great cost. Council should hear your voice." The invitation was clearly significant, a formal recognition of her status within the group that went beyond mere tolerance of her presence. "I would be honored," she said. Niganegi rose to leave, then paused. "There is something else. Scouts bring news of your friend, the doctor." "Dr. Freeman?" Eleanor's heart quickened with concern. "Is he all right?" "He was arrested," Niganegi said grimly. "Militia found medicine he prepared for Cherokee. They call him a traitor." Eleanor felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. Marcus Freeman had risked his safety to help her and Tsali escape, and now he was paying the price for that courage. "Where are they holding him?" "Thornwood Jail. Trial in Augusta after New Year." Niganegi's expression softened slightly. I am sorry, I know he was a true friend to you. After he left, Eleanor sat long into the night, staring into the dying embers of the fire. Freeman had family in Thornwood, a widowed sister and 2 young nephews who depended on him. His imprisonment would bring hardship to them, in addition to the danger he himself faced. The penalty for aiding Cherokee fugitives could be severe: imprisonment, property seizure, even execution in extreme cases. She slept fitfully, troubled by dreams of Freeman behind iron bars, of Briggs's sneering face, of her own cabin sitting empty and vulnerable to looters or arson. By morning, she had reached a decision she knew might not be welcomed. The council gathered at midday in the largest lodge, a circular structure at the center of the camp. 15 people attended: Niganegi, the oldest men and women of the band, the most respected warriors, and 2 spiritual leaders whose knowledge of traditional ways guided many decisions. Eleanor entered last, acutely aware of her outsider status despite Niganegi's invitation. She sat quietly as the council addressed various matters: hunting territories for the remaining winter months, the distribution of dwindling supplies of gunpowder and salt, reports from scouts about militia movements in the valleys below. The discussions were conducted primarily in Cherokee, with Tsali or occasionally Niganegi translating the most important points for her benefit. Finally, Niganegi turned the council's attention to her. Eleanor Harding has lived among us since Blood Mountain. She has proven her worth and her loyalty, but she has something to say today that concerns us all. All eyes turned to Eleanor. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. I've learned that Dr. Freeman, who helped Sally and me escape, has been arrested. He's being held in Thornwood, awaiting trial for aiding Cherokee people. Murmurs spread through the council. Most knew Freeman by reputation, one of the few white men who had treated Cherokee patients regardless of the political climate, who had spoken against the removals even when it became dangerous to do so. This man is a friend of the Cherokee, one of the elders acknowledged. But what can be done? We cannot storm the jail to free him. No, Eleanor agreed, but I might be able to help him in another way. She outlined the plan that had formed in her mind overnight. If I returned to Thornwood, I could speak with his sister, perhaps arrange for legal representation in Augusta. I have some savings hidden in my cabin, if it hasn't been discovered, that could help with his defense. The council erupted in objections. Militia will arrest you too, one woman exclaimed. Briggs still searches for you, another pointed out. Niganegi raised his hand for silence. Let her finish. Eleanor nodded gratefully. I know the risks, but I also know Thornwood. I can approach at night, speak with Freeman's sister in secret. The militia don't watch her house as closely now. According to your scouts, they believe I've fled much farther away, perhaps to the Carolinas. An older man with deep lines etched into his face spoke for several minutes in Cherokee. When he finished, Tsali translated, Gekanawida says your courage is admirable, but your plan dangerous. He asks if one white man's freedom is worth risking. Your life. Dr. Freeman wouldn't be in danger if not for helping me, Eleanor replied. I can't abandon him to face punishment alone. Niganegi watched her with unreadable eyes. And if you succeed in this, would you return to us? The question hung in the air, weighted with implications. Eleanor had considered this carefully. If I can, yes, but I can't promise that. Once I enter Thornwood, I may be discovered, and even if I'm not, returning here would risk leading militia to your winter camp. Silence fell over the council. Finally, one of the spiritual leaders, an elderly woman named Galilahi, whose dreams were said to sometimes foretell the future, spoke in a voice cracked with age. Tsali translated her words with reverence. Galilahi says your path was joined with ours for a purpose. That purpose may now lead you back to the white man's world for a time, but the circle will not be broken. She sees you returning when the dogwoods bloom. The poetic prediction seemed to sway many on the council. After further discussion, most agreed that Eleanor had the right to follow her conscience in this matter, though several expressed concerns about the dangers she would face. "When would you leave?" Niganegi asked. "Tomorrow before dawn," Eleanor replied. "The new moon will provide darkness for travel." Niganegi nodded once. "Then it is decided, but you will not go alone. Edahi will guide you to the edge of white settlements, ensure you reach Thornwood safely." Eleanor accepted this condition, recognizing it as both protection and a practical necessity. After weeks in the mountains, she would need help navigating. Back to familiar territory, the remainder of the day was spent in preparation. Adsila helped Eleanor modify her clothing, removing Cherokee elements that might attract attention while ensuring she would be warm enough for the winter journey. Tsali presented her with a small, carved wooden fox, a protective token, he explained, that his mother had made for him before their separation. "You come back," he said firmly, pressing the carving into her palm. "Promise." Eleanor curled her fingers around the token, touched by the gesture. "I'll try," she said honestly, unwilling to make a promise she might not be able to keep. That evening, as the camp settled for the night, Niganegi sought her out once more. He carried something wrapped in soft deerskin, a bundle about the size of a man's forearm. "For your journey," he said, handing it to her. Eleanor unwrapped the bundle to find a beautifully crafted knife in a beaded sheath. The handle was antler, polished by years of use. The blade steel, rare and valuable in their current circumstances. "This was my father's and his father's before him," Niganegi explained. "First steel knife our family owned, traded from French trappers many generations ago." "I can't accept this," Eleanor protested, recognizing the significance of such an heirloom. "It should remain in your family." "You saved my son when all others would have let him die," Niganegi said simply. "You are family now." The words struck Eleanor with unexpected force. Family. It had been so long since she had truly belonged to anyone, since William's death, since the estrangement from her brother in Savannah. She had grown accustomed to standing alone, to defining herself by her independence rather than her connections. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "I will carry it with honor." Niganegi nodded, satisfied, then spoke in Cherokee, a phrase she had learned during her weeks with the band. "Donadagovi. Until we meet again." Before dawn the next morning, Eleanor and Adahi departed the winter camp. They traveled light, only what they could carry easily on their backs. The journey would take 3 days if weather permitted, following hidden trails and game paths that would keep them away from militia patrols. Snow had fallen during the night, coating the forest in pristine white that muffled their footsteps. Their breath clouded in the cold air as they descended from the protected valley into more exposed terrain. Eleanor found herself memorizing the landscape, uncertain when or if she would see it again. The first day passed uneventfully, with Adahi setting a deliberate pace that balanced speed with caution. They spoke little, conserving energy and remaining alert for any signs of danger. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 15 miles, making camp in a small cave that showed signs of previous use by Cherokee hunters. As they shared a simple meal of dried venison and parched corn, Eleanor asked a question that had been on her mind. "Why did you agree to guide me? You must have more important duties to the band." Adahi poked at their small, nearly smokeless fire with a stick. Niganegi asked, "I obey." "Is that the only reason?" He looked up, his face half illuminated by the firelight. "No, I guide you because you remind me that not all white people choose cruelty. This is important to remember in dark times." The simple statement touched Eleanor deeply. "Thank you for saying that." Adahi shrugged slightly. Truth needs no thanks. He was silent for a moment, then added, My sister's husband believed white. Government's promises took their offered land in west. We received word last moon that he died on journey. Sister and children too. The personal connection to the Trail of Tears stunned Eleanor into silence. What comfort could she possibly offer? In the face of such loss? I'm sorry, she said finally, the words wholly inadequate. Many stories like this now, Adahi replied, his voice flat, but his eyes reflecting grief. This is why some fight, why Niganegi gathers warriors, not for vengeance only, but for survival. The conversation lapsed into silence, but it had shifted. Something in their relationship, a deeper understanding forged through shared knowledge of pain. That night, as Eleanor tried to sleep despite the cold that seeped through her blankets, she found herself thinking of all those who had already been marched westward, how many had not survived the journey, how many families had been torn apart, never to be reunited. The second day of travel brought them to lower elevations, where pine forests gave way to mixed hardwoods, barren of leaves in winter. Here they proceeded with greater caution, as logging operations and small farms began to appear in the distance. Twice they changed course to avoid work parties harvesting timber or hunting groups whose voices carried through the crisp air. By evening, they had reached a ridgeline from which Thornwood was visible in the valley below. A small settlement of perhaps 40 buildings clustered around a central square, with scattered farms and homesteads dotting the surrounding countryside. Smoke rose from chimneys, and lantern light glowed in windows, creating an illusion of warmth and welcome that belied the danger it represented. We wait until full dark, Adahi decided. Then I take you to edge of town. As night fell, they descended. The ridge, moving silently through frozen underbrush and dormant fields. The temperature dropped sharply, and a bitter wind gusted from the north, carrying the promise of more snow. Eleanor pulled her woolen scarf higher around her face, grateful for the additional concealment it provided. They skirted several outlying farms before reaching the eastern edge of Thornwood proper. Here, Adahi halted in the shadow of an abandoned barn. I go no further, he said. Too dangerous. Eleanor nodded in understanding. A Cherokee man spotted in town would create immediate alarm. Thank you for guiding me safely. Adahi regarded her solemnly. Remember the hidden paths we took. Remember landmarks. If you return to the mountains, follow the same route. I will watch for you when dogwoods bloom. The reference to Galilahi's prediction brought a small smile to Eleanor's lips. The old woman's vision. Galilahi's dreams often become truth. And Adahi said seriously, do not dismiss them. He reached into his pouch and withdrew a small object, a polished blue stone etched with a spiral pattern. Show this if Cherokee scouts find you. They will know you are under Niganegi's protection. Eleanor accepted the stone, tucking it securely into her innermost pocket. May your path be safe, she said, using the Cherokee farewell phrase he had taught her, and yours bring you home again, he replied in English, before melting into the darkness like a shadow returning to its source. Alone now, Eleanor studied the town layout before her. Freeman's sister, Sarah Wheaton, lived in a small house near the church at the north end of the settlement. Reaching it would require moving through back alleys and gardens, avoiding the more traveled streets where militia patrols might be encountered. She waited, watching the rhythms of the town's nighttime activity. Most homes were dark now, the hour approaching midnight. Two men emerged from the tavern, their loud voices carrying in the still air as they made their unsteady way homeward. A dog barked briefly, then fell silent. No sign of militia. Drawing a deep breath, Eleanor pulled her scarf higher and moved forward, keeping to the deepest shadows. She skirted the blacksmith's workshop, passed behind the general store, and crossed a small frozen creek that ran along the town's eastern edge. Each step brought a mixture of familiarity and alienation. This was the world she had known all her life, yet she moved through it now as an outsider, a fugitive. The Wheaton home came into view, a modest two-story structure with a small porch and dormered windows. A single light burned in a downstairs room, suggesting someone was still awake despite the late hour. Eleanor approached cautiously, circling to the rear of the house where a kitchen garden lay dormant under winter's grip. The back door was locked, as expected. She tapped softly, rhythmically, 3 quick knocks, followed by 2 slower ones. A pattern Freeman had once mentioned he used with his sister. After a moment, a shadow moved across the curtained window. The door opened a crack, and Sarah Wheaton's worried face appeared. "Who's there?" she whispered nervously. "Sarah, it's Eleanor." "Harding," Eleanor replied softly. "Please, I need to speak with you about your brother." Sarah's eyes widened in recognition, then darted past Eleanor to scan the darkness beyond. Finally, she opened the door wider. "Come in quickly," she urged. "If anyone sees you—" The kitchen was warm, the iron stove still radiating heat from the day's cooking. A single candle provided the only light, casting long shadows across the simple furnishings. Sarah Wheaton was a slight woman in her early 40s, her brown hair streaked with grey, her face bearing the same kindly intelligence as her brother's. "Everyone thinks you've fled to the Carolinas," she said, gesturing for Eleanor to sit at the kitchen table. "Briggs had your cabin searched repeatedly. When they couldn't find you, they seized the property for harbouring fugitives. It's been empty since." Eleanor had expected as much, but the confirmation still stung. The cabin had been her home for 7 years, the last tangible connection to her life with William. "I'm sorry to risk coming here," she said, "but I heard about Marcus. I had to help if I could." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They took him 3 weeks ago. The militia found Cherokee medicine bundles in his office, said it was proof he was aiding Indian insurrection. He admitted preparing them, but refused to say for whom." She clasped her hands tightly in her lap. "They're holding him in Augusta now. The trial is set for January 15th. Do you have legal representation for him? Funds for his defense?" Sarah shook her head. "A court-appointed lawyer who seems more interested in a quick resolution than a proper defense. Marcus's accounts have been frozen until the trial concludes." Eleanor reached into her boot and withdrew a small leather pouch. "I managed to retrieve some savings before I left. It's not much, $42 in coins, but it might help secure better representation." Sarah stared at the pouch in disbelief. "You risked returning just for this?" "Eleanor, they'll arrest you too if you're discovered." "Marcus saved my life and Sally's," Eleanor said simply. "I couldn't do nothing while he faces punishment for that kindness." Sarah accepted the pouch with trembling hands. "Thank you, but you must leave immediately. Briggs still has men watching the town. If they learn you've returned—" "I intend to be gone before dawn," Eleanor assured her. "Is there anything else I can do? Any message for Marcus?" "Tell him the boys and I are managing," Sarah said. "And that his patients ask for him daily. Even some who couldn't publicly support him send food and firewood to us in secret." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. Judge Patterson has recused himself from the trial. Judge William Calhoun will preside instead." Eleanor's heart sank. Calhoun was known for his harsh sentences and his vocal support for Indian removal. If he oversaw Freeman's trial, the prospects for a fair hearing dimmed considerably. "Is there anyone in Augusta who might help?" she asked. "Someone with influence who could speak for Marcus?" Sarah thought for a moment. "Professor James Mitchell, at the medical college. He and Marcus trained together in Philadelphia. He's respected, has connections to the governor's office. But I have no way to reach him." I might, Eleanor said, an idea forming. Her estranged brother Thomas lived in Savannah. Though they hadn't spoken in years, he worked as a clerk in the state government offices and had once mentioned knowing Mitchell. I need paper and ink. Sarah provided writing materials, and Eleanor penned 2 letters, one to Professor Mitchell, explaining Freeman's situation and appealing for his intervention, and another to her brother, brief but urgent, asking him to deliver the first letter personally. I'll take these to Augusta myself, Sarah promised. I'm visiting Marcus next week. They allow family to bring food and clean clothing twice monthly. They spoke for a short while longer, Eleanor providing what details she could about the events that had led to Freeman's arrest without revealing specific information about the Cherokee band's location or strength. As the mantel clock chimed 2, she knew she had already stayed longer than was prudent. I should go, she said, rising from the table. The militia sometimes patrol before dawn. Sarah impulsively embraced her. Be careful, Eleanor, and know that what you and Marcus did, helping that boy, was right, regardless of what the law might say. Eleanor returned the embrace, surprisingly moved by this simple human contact after weeks among people who, while accepting, still maintained certain cultural distances. Take care of yourself and the boys, and tell Marcus, she hesitated, then finished, tell him the fox is safe in the high mountains. She slipped out the back door and into the garden, pausing to listen for any unusual sounds. The town remained quiet, most residents long since asleep. She moved carefully back the way she had come, avoiding the frozen patches where her footsteps might leave visible prints. At the edge of town, Eleanor followed the frozen creek northward, planning to circle around to the ridge where she and Adahy had descended. The wind had picked up, carrying the first flakes of a new snowfall that would help obscure her tracks. The temperature had dropped further, biting at her exposed skin and making her fingers stiff within her gloves. She had just passed the last outlying farm when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of horses approaching at a trot. Dropping to a crouch, she pressed herself against the base of a large oak, trying to make herself invisible in its shadow. 4 riders passed on the road 20 yards to her right, militiamen returning from patrol, their uniforms distinctive, even in the dim moonlight. One was unmistakably Jeremiah Briggs, his red beard catching what little light filtered through the clouds. They showed no sign of having noticed her, continuing toward town at a steady pace. Eleanor waited until their hoofbeats faded before rising and continuing her journey. The encounter had been too close for comfort, reinforcing the danger of her position. She needed to reach the ridge before daylight exposed her to any farming families beginning their morning chores. The climb back up the ridge proved more difficult than the descent had been. The growing snowfall made the ground treacherous, and the darkness concealed obstacles that caused her to stumble more than once. By the time she reached the summit, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten, and she was breathing hard from exertion. She paused to rest briefly, looking back at Thornwood one last time. From this height, it appeared peaceful, unthreatening, just a small collection of buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from morning fires. Yet it represented a world that was increasingly closed to her, a life she had left behind when she chose to help a wounded Cherokee boy. Turning away, Eleanor faced the mountains that had become her new home. Somewhere in those ranges, Niganegi's band continued their struggle to maintain their freedom and their way of life. Somewhere, Tsali waited for her return, clutching a small wooden fox and believing in an old woman's vision of dogwoods in bloom. Eleanor adjusted her pack and started forward, following the hidden path that would lead her back to them. De la Secourbus fell more heavily now, draping the forest in white silence. Behind her, her footprints began to fill, gradually disappearing as if she had never passed that way at all. 3 days later, tired but triumphant, Eleanor returned to the winter camp. Her arrival caused immediate stir. Children running to greet her, women calling out welcome, warriors nodding respect for her successful journey. Tsali pushed through the crowd, his face alight with relief and joy. "You came back!" he exclaimed, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "I knew you would." "I promised to try," she reminded him with a smile. "And here I am." Niganegi approached more formally, but his eyes held approval. "You completed your task without capture?" Eleanor nodded. "I spoke with Freeman's sister, gave her what money I had saved. She'll arrange better legal representation and contact people who might help his case." She didn't mention the close encounter with Briggs and his patrol. No need to worry them unnecessarily. That evening, around the council fire, Eleanor shared what she had learned about conditions in the settlements. Militia presence had increased, with checkpoints established on major roads and regular patrols extending farther into the mountains. Rumors suggested that more Cherokee had been captured trying to flee northward, adding urgency to the band's need for vigilance. "They believe most resistance ended," Eleanor explained. "They think only scattered families remain, not organized bands like yours. That works to our advantage. They aren't looking for a group this size." Niganegi absorbed this information thoughtfully. "Spring will bring new challenges. When snow melts, tracking becomes easier. We must prepare." The council discussed various options, splitting into smaller groups, moving higher into the mountains, perhaps sending some families northward toward Cherokee communities rumored to exist in the distant Smoky Mountains. No decisions were reached that night, but Eleanor sensed a shift in how her input was received. She was no longer an outsider being tolerated, but a member whose experience and knowledge were valued. As winter deepened, life in the camp fell into a rhythm. Hunting parties brought in game when weather permitted. Women maintained the lodge. Fires prepared meals, crafted clothing and tools from available materials. Children received instruction in both practical skills and cultural traditions, ensuring that regardless of their circumstances, Cherokee ways would continue. Eleanor found herself increasingly integrated into this life. She learned to recognize dozens of medicinal plants even beneath snow cover, to set snares for rabbits, to predict weather changes from subtle signs in the sky and wind. Her Cherokee vocabulary expanded, allowing her to participate more fully in conversations and storytelling sessions that sustained the community through long winter evenings. Niganegi began including her in more council discussions, particularly those involving potential interactions with white settlements or militia movements. Her perspective often provided insights that helped the band avoid dangerous areas or take advantage of temporary gaps in patrol schedules. One bitter January night, as a blizzard howled outside the lodges, Niganegi invited Eleanor to his dwelling. It was larger than most, serving both as his family's home and as a meeting place for small councils. Tsali was there, along with Adsila and the elderly Galilahi, whose prophetic dream had foreseen Eleanor's return. Niganegi gestured for her to sit beside the fire, where a small feast had been prepared. Venison, wild rice gathered before winter, dried berries and corn cakes sweetened with honey. The formality of the gathering suggested something significant was about to occur. "Eleanor Harding," Niganegi began, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony. "You came to us as stranger, became ally, then friend. You left to help your people, returned to help ours. The council has spoken. We offer you a place among Cherokee, not just to live with us, but to be of us." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "I don't understand." Adsila smiled gently. "He offers adoption, child. To make you Cherokee, in all but blood." The concept took Eleanor's breath away. Adoption into the tribe was a rare honor, particularly for an adult, and even more so for someone of European descent. It represented not just acceptance, but full integration into their society and kinship structure. "This is she struggled, to find words adequate to the moment. I'm deeply honored, but are you certain? Some might object to bringing a white woman into the tribe this way. Some always object to change, Niganegi acknowledged. But the council is unanimous. You have proven your heart. In dark times, we must recognize true allies wherever they appear. Galilahi spoke then, her ancient voice carrying surprising strength. Sali translated, "She says the Spirit showed her this path months ago, that you were sent to us for a purpose beyond saving one boy. Your knowledge of White World helps protect Cherokee. Your skills heal our people. Your presence reminds us that not all with pale skin carry hatred in their hearts." Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes. In all her life, she had never experienced such complete acceptance, not from her disapproving family, not even in her marriage, where loving William had meant constant adjustment to his expectations of a frontier wife. "What would this mean?" she asked, wanting to understand fully before responding. "What would change?" "You would become a member of the Wolf Clan," Niganegi explained. "My sister in Cherokee way, Tsali's aunt. You would have a place in council, voice in decisions. No longer an outsider, but part of our family, our future." Family. The word resonated as it had when Niganegi had given her his father's knife. After years of solitude, years of defining herself by her ability to stand alone, the offer of belonging called to something deep within her, a need she had suppressed but never truly overcome. "Yes," she said simply, "I accept with gratitude and humility." Niganegi nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. "Ceremony will be held at next full moon. Until then, Adsila will teach you what you must know." The following weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Eleanor learned the complex kinship patterns of the Wolf Clan, memorized ritual phrases in Cherokee, practiced traditional dances that would form part of the adoption ceremony. Adsila guided her patiently, explaining the significance behind each element and how they connected to the larger Cherokee worldview. "Wolf Clan are protectors," she told Eleanor. "Leaders in war, advisors in peace, strong hearts, fierce loyalty. This fits you." When the full moon rose in February, the entire band gathered for the ceremony. Eleanor was led to a special lodge where Adsila and two other women washed her hair with an herbal mixture, painted symbols on her face and hands, and dressed her in clothing they had secretly prepared, a deerskin dress adorned with quill work, and beads in patterns specific to the Wolf Clan. As she emerged, the gathered Cherokee formed a circle around the central fire. Her drums began a slow, steady beat that seemed to match Eleanor's pounding heart. Niganegi stood opposite her across the flames, wearing ceremonial paint and a magnificent headdress of eagle feathers. Tsali stood beside him, solemn but with eyes that shone with pride. The ceremony proceeded in Cherokee, the ancient words carrying power even when their specific meanings remained partially obscured to Eleanor despite her studies. Niganegi spoke at length, recounting what Eleanor recognized as the story of finding Tsali, of their journey to Blood Mountain, of her choices and actions since joining them. At a signal from the drummers, Eleanor stepped forward as she had been instructed. Niganegi met her at the fire's edge, holding a bowl of red paint. With deliberate movements, he traced the Wolf Clan symbol on her forehead, a stylized wolf track that marked her new identity. Then he placed around her neck a necklace of carved bone and blue stones, signifying her place within the clan's lineage. "From this day," he proclaimed in English for her benefit, "you are Unola, one who follows wind. You are Wolf Clan, sister of my blood, protector of our people. Your path is our path. Your future is our future." The drummers increased their tempo. The assembled Cherokee began a chant that rose and fell like waves, enveloping Eleanor in sound and emotion. Sali stepped forward, taking her hand to lead her in the first steps of a dance that encircled the fire, a dance of welcome, of integration, of new beginnings. As the celebration continued into the night, with feasting and storytelling and more dancing, Eleanor found herself watching the faces around her, no longer strangers or even just friends, but family. The calendar pages of winter turned slowly. February melted into March, bringing longer days and occasional thaws that hinted at spring's approach. For Eleanor, now known among the Cherokee as Unola, the passing weeks brought increasing integration into the rhythms and responsibilities of tribal life. Her adoption into the Wolf Clan had formalized what had been gradually occurring since Blood Mountain, a transformation from outsider to member, from observer to participant. The Cherokee name given to her, one who follows wind, acknowledged both her journey to them and her adaptable nature. She wore it with growing confidence, responding naturally when called Unola instead of Eleanor. Early one morning in late March, as the first green shoots began to emerge from the forest floor, Niganegi called a council meeting. Scouts had returned, with troubling news. Militia movements in the valleys had increased significantly. Several small Cherokee family groups hiding in the lower elevations had been captured. Others had fled north, bringing warnings that a systematic sweep of the mountains was being planned for early spring. They search more carefully now, Adahi reported grimly, using Cherokee trackers who surrendered, men who know our hiding places, our movement patterns. A somber silence greeted this information. Using their own people against them was a devastating tactic, one that had proven effective in other regions where Cherokee resistance had been broken. "How many militia?" Niganegi asked. "3 large groups," Adahi replied. "Perhaps 60 men total, well armed. They establish base camps, then send smaller patrols to search specific areas." Eleanor Unola listened intently, mentally mapping the patrol locations Adahi described against her knowledge of the surrounding mountains. A pattern emerged that concerned her deeply. "They're moving in a coordinated search pattern," she observed when given the opportunity to speak. "Not random patrols. Someone is directing this systematically, using military strategy." Niganegi nodded, having reached the same conclusion. "They bring experienced soldiers now, not just local militia." "We must move camp," one of the elder women urged. "Go higher into the mountains." "Higher means less game, less shelter," another council member countered, "and snow is still deep on northern slopes." The discussion continued, weighing various options against their liabilities. Some advocated splitting into smaller family groups that could hide more easily. Others suggested a rapid move northward toward the Great Smoky Mountains, where the terrain was more rugged and Cherokee presence historically stronger. Unola listened to all perspectives before offering her thoughts. "If we move as one group, we leave a single trail, easier to follow. If we split completely, we lose our strength in numbers." She paused, considering. "But there may be a third approach." All eyes turned to her with interest. Since her adoption, her strategic insights had proven valuable on multiple occasions. "We create a false trail," she explained, "a large, obvious path heading northeast, as if the entire band moved that direction. A smaller group, perhaps 5 warriors, continues along this trail for several days, making camps, leaving evidence of a large group. Meanwhile, the main band divides into 3 smaller groups, each taking different routes to reunite at a predetermined location." Niganegi considered the suggestion thoughtfully. This could work. The militia would follow the obvious trail, spending days pursuing phantoms while we establish a new camp elsewhere. "Where would we reunite?" asked an elder. Unola glanced at Sali, who had been sitting quietly beside his father throughout the council. "The boy has mentioned a place. A hidden valley beyond Three Sisters Peaks. He says it has natural caves, a clear spring, good hunting. Difficult to approach except through a narrow pass that could be easily defended." Sali nodded confirmation. "My uncle took me there once. Few know of it, even among Cherokee." The council debated the proposal thoroughly, refining details and addressing potential complications. By midday, A plan had been formalized. The band would depart at dawn, separating into 3 groups that would travel by different routes to the hidden valley. Idahi would lead the decoy party, creating an obvious trail for militia to follow before doubling back to rejoin them later. Unola will guide the first group with Sali, Niganegi decided. I will lead the second. Gekanawida will take the third. 4 days' journey if all goes well. We meet at the valley entrance when the moon is half full. As the council dispersed to begin preparations for departure, Sali caught Unola's arm. You remember the way to the hidden valley? He asked, concerned about the responsibility placed on them. I remember your descriptions, she assured him. And I've studied the stars enough now to maintain our direction. Between us, we'll find it. That evening, as the camp buzzed with activity, packing essential supplies, distributing tools and weapons, preparing travel food, Unola sat with Adsila outside their lodge. The older woman had become something of a mentor to her, patient in explaining Cherokee ways and generous in sharing her knowledge of forest survival. You lead people tomorrow, Adsila observed. First time since becoming Wolf Clan. Unola nodded, acutely aware of the trust being placed in her. Niganegi believes I'm ready. He is right. Adsila's weathered face creased in a smile. You have a good head, strong heart, Cherokee spirit now. I still worry, Unola admitted. What if the militia catches our trail? What if I lead our group into danger? Adsila was silent for a moment, her gaze on the dying daylight filtering through the trees. When I was a girl, she said finally, my grandmother told me, fear is shadow cast by courage. Without one, cannot have other. Your fear shows wisdom, not weakness. The simple wisdom steadied Unola as she completed her own preparations. Into her pack went only essentials, extra moccasins crafted during winter months, dried meat and corn, the blue stone Adahi had given her, flint and steel for firemaking and Niganegi's knife, now her most prized possession. Around her neck hung the Wolf Clan necklace she had received at her adoption ceremony, a constant reminder of her new identity and responsibilities. Dawn broke clear and cold the following morning. The camp had been dismantled with practiced efficiency. Lodges taken down, fire pits concealed, all trace of long-term habitation erased from the landscape. The band gathered one final time for a brief blessing ceremony before dividing into their assigned groups. Unola's party consisted of 14 people, herself and Sali, 3 warriors for protection, 2 elderly men whose knowledge of plant medicine was vital to the band, and 4 families with young children. They would take the western route, following game trails through a series of narrow valleys before turning northward toward Three Sisters Peaks. Niganegi approached before they departed. Travel safely, sister, he said, using the kinship term that still gave Unola a sense of wonder when addressed to her. Trust Sali's memory and your own instincts. We'll reach the valley as planned, she assured him. Watch for our signal fire on the half-moon. He nodded, then turned to his son, placing both hands on the boy's shoulders. They spoke briefly in Cherokee, words too private for translation, but clearly meaningful to both. Sali stood straighter afterward, responsibility sitting visibly on his young shoulders. The decoy party left first, making deliberate tracks eastward, an obvious trail designed to catch militia attention. An hour later, the 3 main groups departed in different directions, maintaining careful spacing to avoid creating apparent patterns in their movement. Unola led her group westward at a steady pace, mindful of the elders and children with them. Sali ranged ahead as a scout, using his smaller size and natural stealth to advantage. 2 warriors formed the rear guard, watchful for any sign of pursuit, while the third stayed close to the main group for immediate protection if needed. The first day passed without incident. They covered nearly 10 miles of challenging terrain, moving from the winter camp's higher elevation down into a series of forested valleys. Unola kept them near running water where possible, both for drinking supplies and because the sound helped mask their movement noise. When they made camp that evening, she insisted on minimal fire for cooking only, extinguished well before darkness fell. "Cold sleeping," one of the mothers observed, huddling her 2 small children closer for warmth. "Better cold than captured," Unola replied gently. "We can withstand discomfort for a few nights." The second day brought rain, a steady, penetrating drizzle that soaked clothing and dampened spirits, but provided excellent cover for their movements. Tracking would be nearly impossible in such conditions, washing away footprints and obscuring other signs of passage. They made good progress despite the weather, reaching the western edge of their planned route by nightfall. It was during the third day's journey that trouble found them. They had been following a narrow ridge that offered faster travel than the dense forest below. Sali had gone ahead to scout the descent into the next valley when he returned at a run, eyes wide with alarm. "Militia," he reported breathlessly, "coming up the other side of the ridge." 8 men with rifles. Unola made an instant decision. Everyone off the ridge, now, down this slope, quickly but quietly. She directed them to a steep drainage gully that offered concealment, though the descent was treacherous. Mothers passed children hand to hand down the most difficult sections. One of the elders slipped on wet leaves, opening a gash on his forearm that Unola quickly bound with a strip of cloth to prevent blood from leaving a trail. They had just reached the bottom when voices became audible above, men talking and laughing. Unaware of how close they had come to their quarry, Unola signaled for absolute silence, holding her breath as a militiaman appeared briefly at the ridge edge, scanning the forest below. After what seemed an eternity, he turned away, rejoining his companions as they continued along the ridgeline. "They are not following us," one of the warriors whispered, "just routine patrol." "For now," Unola cautioned, "but we can't risk the ridge path again. We'll have to travel through the valley floor, slower but safer." This change of route cost them valuable time. The valley's undergrowth was thick with early spring growth, requiring careful navigation to avoid leaving obvious trails. By nightfall, they had covered less than half their intended distance for the day. Making matters worse, the rain had intensified, forcing them to establish camp earlier than planned to ensure the children and elders didn't succumb to dangerous chilling. Under an overhanging rock face that provided minimal shelter, they huddled together for warmth, sharing the last of their prepared travel food. No fire was possible in the downpour, meaning cold meals and wet clothing throughout the night. Despite these hardships, no complaints were voiced. Everyone understood the stakes of their journey. "Do we still reach the valley on time?" Charlie asked quietly as they reviewed their route by the dim light of a carefully shielded candle. Unola studied the crude map they had scratched in the dirt. "If the weather improves, yes. We'll need to make up the distance tomorrow. But we have the entire day of the half-moon to arrive. Niganegi wouldn't expect us before then." The rain continued through the night, finally tapering off near dawn. They set out early, everyone stiff and tired from sleeping on cold ground in damp clothing. Unola pushed them to a faster pace now that immediate danger seemed past, taking a more direct route toward the distinctive formation known as Three Sisters Peaks, 3 sharp mountain tops arranged in a triangular pattern that served as their primary navigation landmark. By midday, they had made up most of their lost time. The terrain had begun to rise again as they approached the mountain range containing their destination. Unola called a brief rest when they reached a small stream, allowing everyone to drink and refill water containers before the steeper climb. Ahead, as she knelt by the water, something caught her attention, a faint but distinctive scent carried on the breeze. Smoke. Not the natural smoke of a lightning-struck tree, but the controlled burn of a campfire. Someone was ahead of them. She signaled to the warriors, who confirmed her detection with grim nods. One slipped away to scout ahead, returning within half an hour with disturbing news. "Militia camp," he reported. "Just 2 miles ahead, in pass. We need to cross. Maybe 12 men. Looks like they've been there at least 1 day." This was unexpected and deeply concerning. The pass he described was the primary approach to the hidden valley, the very route they had planned to take. Either the militia had remarkable luck in their positioning, or someone had betrayed knowledge of potential Cherokee hiding places. "Can we go around?" Unola asked, already trying to envision alternative routes. The warrior shook his head. "Mountains too steep on both sides. Pass is only way through unless we backtrack 3 days." Backtracking wasn't an option. They had neither the supplies nor the time before the rendezvous with the other groups. Going through the militia-held pass meant certain capture. They needed a third option. Sali had been listening intently. "There is another way," he said suddenly. "Not really a path. My uncle showed me. Very dangerous. A cliff climb, then through. Caves. Few know it." "How dangerous?" Unola asked directly. The boy met her eyes solemnly. "For children elders, very hard, maybe impossible." Unola weighed their limited options. "Show me this route," she decided. "I need to see it before we decide." Leaving the group hidden in a dense thicket under the protection of 2 warriors, Unola followed Sali and the 3rd warrior on a circuitous path that climbed the eastern flank of the mountain adjacent to the pass. They moved with extreme caution, aware that militia scouts might be patrolling the higher elevations as well. After an hour's careful climb, Sali brought them to a narrow ledge that skirted a near-vertical rock face. Below them stretched a dizzying drop of several hundred feet to the forest floor. Above rose another 100 feet of sheer cliff to the mountain's rocky crown. "We follow a ledge," Sali explained, pointing along its precarious course. "It goes around the mountain, then up through a crack in the rock. Inside, caves connect to the valley behind." Unola studied the route with concern. The ledge was barely 2 feet wide in places, with nothing to hold onto but the rough rock face beside. One misstep would mean certain death. For able-bodied adults, it would be challenging but possible. For small children or elders with limited mobility. "How far are the caves?" she asked. "Half a mile along the ledge," Sali replied. "Then climb. Up the crack like a chimney in rock, caves just beyond." The warrior who had accompanied them, Warrior, one of the band's most experienced hunters, spoke up. "I carry 1 elder. Others carry children. Go very slow, very careful. Better chance than fighting militia with rifles." Unola nodded. Decision made. "We'll take this route. We have enough daylight left if we move now." They returned to the main group and explained the situation. Initially, there were looks of alarm at the description of the ledge path, but the alternative, confrontation with a superior militia force, was clearly worse. Preparations were made quickly. The strongest adults would carry the smallest children, strapped to their backs with deerskin bindings. The 2 elderly men would be supported between warriors, 1 on each side. Like climbing trees, Unola encouraged an 8-year-old girl who looked particularly frightened. 1 hand, 1 foot at a time. Never let go with both hands at once. Their progress along the ledge was agonizingly slow. Unola led the way, with Sali directly behind her, calling out warnings about narrower sections or loose rock. Each person followed at a careful distance, moving methodically, focusing only on the next step rather than the yawning emptiness beyond the ledge edge. At the most treacherous point, where the ledge narrowed to barely 18 inches and curved around a projecting rock face, Unola anchored herself firmly and helped each person navigate the turn. Her heart pounded as the first elder approached. Gaditsi, whose joints were stiffened with age and whose balance was uncertain at best, With Warrior supporting him from behind and Unola gripping his arm from the front, they eased him around the corner inch by painful inch. "Almost there," she encouraged, as his face contorted with effort and fear. "Just 3 more steps, and the ledge widens again." When the last of their group, a warrior carrying a sleeping 3-year-old, cleared the dangerous curve, Unola allowed herself a moment's relief. Then they continued onward, the ledge gradually widening as it approached a dark, vertical fissure. In the cliff face, this chimney, as Sally had called it, presented a different challenge. It was a natural crack in the rock about 3 feet wide, rising steeply for approximately 40 feet before opening onto another level. Climbing it would require pressing against both walls, using friction and counterpressure to ascend rather than traditional handholds. "I go first," Sally said. "Show how." Unola watched anxiously as the boy wedged himself into the crack and began working his way upward, bracing his back against one wall and his feet against the other, inching upward with controlled movements. Despite his injury months ago, he moved with confidence, reaching the top in less than 5 minutes. "Your turn," he called down softly. For the adults, the chimney climb proved less difficult than the ledge traverse had been. The enclosed space provided a sense of security despite the height, and the technique, once demonstrated, was relatively straightforward. The children were passed up one at a time, with an adult below and another above, to ensure safety. For the elders, ropes were improvised from strong vines to provide additional security as they made the ascent with warriors climbing alongside to support them. By sunset, all 14 members of their group had reached the top of the chimney climb. Beyond, as Sally had promised, they found a series of interconnected caves that tunneled through the mountain's upper reaches. Having come this far, they decided to make camp in the outermost cave, finally risking a small fire for warmth and hot food after their grueling ordeal. "How far is the valley now?" Unola asked Sally as they shared a meal of dried venison softened in hot water. "Through caves down the other side of the mountain," the boy replied, gesturing to indicate distance. "Half-day's walk tomorrow. We reach." Before others, their spirits lifted at this news. Despite the unexpected obstacle of the militia encampment, they would make the rendezvous on time. The fire's warmth began to ease the chill from their bodies, and the shared experience of overcoming the dangerous passage created a quiet bond among the group. As most settled into exhausted sleep, Unola took first watch at the cave entrance. The night was clear now, stars brilliant in the black sky, the half-moon rising just as Niganegi had predicted when planning their reunion. She found herself reflecting on the transformation of her life in the months since finding Tsali and her. Root cellar, she had gone from solitary widow to adopted clan member, from struggling survivor to trusted leader. The journey had been neither easy nor straightforward, involving sacrifice and danger alongside moments of unexpected beauty and human connection. Yet she could not imagine returning to her previous existence, even if that option had remained available to her. A soft footfall interrupted her thoughts. Tsali settled beside her, wrapping his blanket around his shoulders against the night chill. "Cannot sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "Thinking too much." "About what?" "About tomorrow. About father and others. About what happens after we reach Valley." He looked up at her, his young face serious in the moonlight. "Militia not stop hunting. We run, hide, run again. How long can we live this way?" The question held no easy answer. The systematic effort to remove all Cherokee from their ancestral lands showed no signs of abating. Each season brought new losses, new pressures, new reasons for despair. "I don't know," Unola admitted honestly, "but I do know that your people have survived challenges before. They adapted, preserved what mattered most, found new ways to continue." "Some say we should fight more," Tsali said quietly. "Not just hide. Attack militia, make them afraid to come into the mountains." Unola had heard these discussions among some of the warriors, debates about whether passive evasion or active resistance would better serve their long-term survival. Niganegi had thus far maintained a middle path, avoiding direct confrontation while refusing surrender, but the pressure for more aggressive action grew with each new encroachment. "Fighting brings more soldiers," she observed. "More weapons, more deaths on both sides. But just hiding brings slow death," Tsali countered with unexpected maturity. Each season, fewer Cherokee remain free. Their conversation was interrupted by a distant sound that instantly commanded their full attention. Voices carried on the night air, coming from the direction of the pass below. Male voices, speaking English, accompanied by the distinctive clink of equipment that suggested armed men on the move. "Militia night patrol," Unola whispered, drawing back deeper into the cave shadow. "They must be searching the mountain paths." They listened tensely, but the voices gradually faded as the patrol moved away from their location. Still, the close call reinforced the precariousness of their situation. Even this difficult hidden route had nearly brought them into contact with their pursuers. "We should post an additional guard tonight," Unola decided, "and leave at first light tomorrow. The sooner we reach the hidden valley, the better." When dawn broke, they moved efficiently through the cave system, following Tsali's remembered path from his single previous visit years earlier. The caves narrowed in places, requiring them to crawl on hands and knees, then opened into chambers large enough for all to stand comfortably. Filtered light from small fissures in the rock ceiling provided just enough illumination to navigate. The cave system eventually led them to an exit on the mountain's northern face, a narrow opening partially concealed by scrub growth that would be virtually impossible to spot from below. From this vantage point, they could see their destination, a verdant valley nestled between protective mountain ridges, a silver thread of water winding through its center. Their descent from the cave exit was less harrowing than the previous day's cliff traverse, following a steep but manageable trail down through pine forest to the valley floor. By midday, they had reached the entrance to the hidden valley, a narrow pass between towering rock formations that created a natural gateway. Tsali led them to a secluded clearing near the valley's center, where a clear spring bubbled from the ground and tall trees provided canopy cover from aerial observation. It was an ideal site for regrouping, defensible with abundant water, natural shelter options, and no signs of recent human presence. "We made it," Unola said with quiet satisfaction, as the group began establishing a temporary camp. "Now we wait for the others." The wait proved shorter than expected. Just before sunset, lookouts posted at the valley entrance reported movement, the approach of Niganegi's group, having navigated their own path successfully. The reunion brought relief and celebration, with families embracing and everyone sharing tales of their respective journeys. Niganegi listened intently to Unola's account of the militia encampment at the main pass and their dangerous detour via the cliff ledge and caves. "You did well, sister," he said when she had finished. "Bringing everyone safely through such terrain required both courage and wisdom." "Tsali deserves much of the credit," she replied honestly. "Without his knowledge of the hidden route, we would have been forced to confront the militia or turn back." Niganegi nodded, pride evident as he glanced at his son. "He grows stronger each day, as do you in your new role among us." Gekanawida's group arrived the following morning, completing their band's reunification without a single member lost. They had encountered their own challenges, a flooded river crossing, a frightening encounter with a mother bear and cubs, but had avoided any contact with militia patrols. Only Adahi's decoy party remained unaccounted for. Their mission had been the most dangerous, deliberately leaving a trail for militia to follow, making themselves visible enough to maintain pursuit without allowing capture. As the half-moon rose fully that night with no sign of their return, concern began to grow. "Should we send searchers?" Unola asked during the evening council. Niganegi considered this carefully. Not yet. Adahi knows to be cautious. If pursued closely, he would take longer route back to avoid leading militia here. His judgment proved sound. Shortly after dawn the next day, sentries reported 3 figures approaching the valley entrance, half the number that had departed on the decoy mission. Adahi among them, moving slowly, supporting a 4th man between them who appeared injured. Unola joined those who rushed to assist, helping carry the wounded warrior, Kanuna, a young man barely 20, to a place where his injuries could be treated. An improvised stretcher had been constructed from branches and buckskin, but blood had soaked through in alarming quantities. Militia ambush, Adahi explained grimly, as Unola examined Kanuna's wounds, a gunshot to the shoulder and a deep knife wound in his side. They split forces, circled behind us. 2 warriors fell. We barely escaped with Kanuna. While Adsila prepared poultices and medicine, Unola cleaned and stitched the injuries as Freeman had taught her. The bullet had passed through muscle without hitting bone, a fortunate trajectory that improved Kanuna's chances of recovery. The knife wound was more concerning, deep enough to potentially damage internal organs. All they could do was clean it thoroughly, stitch the outer layers, and hope for healing from within. They were waiting for us, Adahi continued, reporting to Niganegi and the gathered council after Kanuna had been stabilized, not following our trail but positioned as if they knew where we would go. Too many coincidences. The militia at the Unola's group needed to cross the ambush in a place perfect for such tactics. The implication hung heavily in the air. Someone had revealed information about Cherokee movements and likely hiding places. Whether intentionally or through capture and interrogation, their security had been compromised. We cannot know who, Niganegi acknowledged soberly, but we must assume the militia now has knowledge of our patterns, our methods. This changes how we must operate. The council extended long into the night, debating options that grew increasingly limited. The hidden valley offered temporary safety, but game would eventually become scarce if they remained too long. Moving in any direction risked encounters with militia who now seemed to have improved intelligence about Cherokee movements. What about north? Unola suggested. Beyond Great Smoky Mountains. Some say Cherokee bands there live more freely. Farther, from militia control, journey would be difficult, Gekanawida cautioned. Many weeks through dangerous territory, with children and elders, and no guarantee conditions are better there. As discussions continued without clear resolution, Tsali approached Unola with news that shifted their focus entirely. Scout returning, he reported urgently. Spotted riders approaching from the south, many horses moving fast toward the valley. Niganegi immediately dispatched additional scouts to confirm the information and assess the threat. They returned within the hour, bringing details that were both puzzling and potentially alarming. 20 riders, the lead scout reported. Cherokee, not militia, armed with rifles, bows, led by a tall man with war paint and eagle feathers. They follow our trail directly to the valley. Cherokee, Niganegi repeated, surprised. You're certain? Not Cherokee scouts working for militia? Cherokee free fighters, the scout clarified, from northern bands. I recognized war paint patterns. This was unexpected news. Rumors had circulated for months about Cherokee resistance. Fighters operating in the northernmost mountains, bands that actively fought militia rather than simply evading them. Some were said to raid settlements, ambush patrols, and generally make occupation of Cherokee territory costly for white authorities. Niganegi had maintained distance from such groups, concerned about the retribution they might provoke against all Cherokee, including non-combatants. How soon will they reach the valley entrance? He asked. Before midday tomorrow, the scout estimated. They travel light, move fast. Niganegi called an immediate war council, including only his most trusted advisors, Gekanawida, Adahi, 2 other senior warriors, and Unola, whose perspective as both Cherokee and former white settler he particularly valued in this situation. "These warriors may bring danger with them," he observed. "If the militia pursues them, our hidden valley becomes a battleground. Or they bring strength," Adahi countered. "More fighters to protect our people, possibly news of safer territories. We should meet them before they enter the valley," Unola suggested. "Learn their intentions, assess whether they bring pursuit before deciding whether to welcome them." This middle approach gained consensus. A small delegation would intercept the approaching Cherokee group, led by Niganegi himself, with Adahi, another warrior, and Unola accompanying him. They would depart at dawn, planning to make contact well before the riders reached the valley entrance. As preparations were made for this diplomatic mission, Unola found herself reflecting on how circumstances continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Just when they had established a momentary sanctuary, new complications arose. The arrival of these unknown Cherokee, who might be allies, threats, or something in between. She thought again of Sali's question from the previous night. How long can we live this way? The approaching riders might offer a different vision of Cherokee resistance, perhaps more aggressive, more confrontational than Niganegi's careful evasion strategy. Whether that represented hope or additional danger remained to be seen. Dawn found them already moving southward along the valley approach, traveling light with only essential weapons and supplies. They established a position on a rocky promontory overlooking the trail the riders would likely follow, visible enough to be noticed without being immediately vulnerable. As the morning sun rose higher, Unola spotted movement in the distance. Riders emerging from the forest into a meadow about a half-mile away. Even at this distance, their Cherokee identity was clear from their clothing, riding style and formation. At their head rode a commanding figure whose eagle feathers and distinctive war paint marked him as a chief or war leader. "They come directly," Niganegi observed. "No attempt at concealment, either confident or careless," Adahi remarked. "Or they know we're here and see no need for stealth," Unola added. Niganegi raised an arm in the traditional Cherokee greeting signal as the riders drew closer. The leader spotted them immediately, raising his hand in response before directing his band to halt a respectful distance away. He then rode forward alone, his posture conveying both confidence and courtesy. As he approached, Unola could see him more clearly, a tall, powerfully built man, perhaps 10 years Niganegi's junior, with striking features marked by both battle, scars and ceremonial tattoos. His clothing was a blend of traditional Cherokee elements and adopted white items, buckskin leggings and shirt beneath a cavalry officer's coat that had clearly been taken from its previous owner, rather than traded. "For Sio Niganegi," he called in Cherokee as he drew his horse to a stop. "It has been many seasons since our paths crossed." Niganegi's expression registered recognition. "Tsula Haloga," he replied, "war chief of the northern bands. Your reputation travels far these days." The warrior, Tsula Haloga, dismounted in a fluid motion, approaching on foot as a sign of respect. "As does yours, though for different reasons. Some say Niganegi hides while others fight. The challenge was delivered without overt hostility, but the underlying criticism was unmistakable. Niganegi showed no reaction beyond a slight tightening around his eyes. "I protect families, children, elders," he responded evenly. "What does Tsula Haloga protect with his raids and ambushes?" "The future," came the immediate reply. "A future where Cherokee walk mountains without fear, where militia hesitate to enter our territories." Unola observed the exchange with fascination. Here were two leaders with fundamentally different approaches to the same crisis. One focused on immediate survival, the other on aggressive resistance. Both Cherokee, both committed to their people's welfare, yet divided on means, if not ends. Tsula Haloga's Gaze shifted to her, taking in her clearly European features with evident surprise. "You travel with interesting companions, Niganegi. This is Unola of the Wolf Clan," Niganegi introduced her formally. "My sister by adoption, trusted council member." If Tsula was shocked by this information, he concealed it well. He inclined, his head slightly in acknowledgement. "The white woman who saved Niganegi's son. Stories travel even to northern mountains." Unola returned his gaze steadily. "My path chose me when I found a wounded boy. Now my path is with Cherokee." Tsula studied her for a moment longer, then turned back to Niganegi. "We come with purpose, not by chance. News you must hear, opportunity you should consider." "Speak then," Niganegi invited. "Not here," Tsula gestured to his waiting riders. "My men are tired, our horses need rest. Offer us shelter for one night, and I will share what we know, what we propose." It was both request and challenge, an appeal to Cherokee hospitality, traditions that would be difficult to refuse without causing offense. Niganegi considered briefly, then nodded agreement. "You and your warriors may enter the hidden valley as guests, but I ask that you respect our ways, our decisions about how we survive. As you must respect that we have chosen different ways," Tsula countered. The two leaders had established their positions clearly, neither yielding but both acknowledging the other's right to their chosen path. It was enough for the moment, a foundation for further discussion, if not immediate agreement. As they returned to the valley with 20 additional Cherokee warriors in tow, Unola wondered what news or proposal had brought Tsula band so deliberately to their sanctuary. Whatever it was, she sensed that the careful balance Niganegi had maintained was about to face its greatest challenge yet. The council fire burned high that night, flames reaching toward stars scattered like frost across the black sky. Around, it sat two circles, the inner comprised of Niganegi, Tsula and their respective advisors, the outer formed by warriors from both bands, women, elders and older children permitted to witness this momentous meeting. Unola sat at Niganegi's right, the position affirming her status despite the questioning glances from the northern warriors. Tali had been granted permission to attend, sitting quietly behind his father, absorbing everything with keen attention. After traditional prayers and ceremonial tobacco offering, Tsula rose to address the council. 3 moons ago, he began, his deep voice carrying clearly. Militia attacked a Cherokee village near Shooting Creek. Women, children killed without mercy. Those captured were marched west in chains. My scouts found a girl hiding in the forest, sole survivor. She spoke of soldiers with orders to clear all Cherokee from mountains before the first harvest moon. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. This represented an escalation, not just removal, but potential extermination of those who continued to resist. "We captured a militia officer 2 weeks past," Tsula continued. "Before he died, he confirmed new orders from the governor. No more peaceful relocations offered. Any Cherokee found in mountains to be treated as hostile, regardless of age or gender. These could be merely threats," Gekanawida suggested, "meant to frighten us into surrender." Tsula shook his head grimly. "Scouts report 6 new militia. Companies moving into mountain territories, settlements organizing local forces. They bring dogs trained to track. Cherokee who surrendered, being forced to guide them to hidden places. The implications were clear and devastating. Their existing strategy of evasion would become increasingly untenable as militia forces multiplied and their knowledge of Cherokee hiding places improved. "What do you propose?" Niganegi asked, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Tsula eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Cherokee from many bands unite. We number over 300 warriors in northern mountains. With your people, others hiding in these ranges, we could field a force of 500. Not enough to defeat all militia, but enough to secure territory, establish boundaries they fear to cross. Open war, Niganegi stated flatly. Survival, Tsula countered. We fought alongside the Northern Band in Florida, Seminole, who resist removal for years now. They control territories where soldiers enter only at great risk. The Seminole fight in swamplands perfect for their methods, Adahi pointed out, and still they lose ground each season. But they remain free, Tsula insisted. Their children grow up knowing their ways, not dying on forced marches or in white schools. The debate continued as night deepened, illuminating the fundamental division in approaches. Niganegi's band had prioritized keeping families intact, maintaining cultural practices, and avoiding confrontation that might bring devastating retaliation. Tsula warriors had chosen active resistance, believing that only through force could any Cherokee territory be preserved. When asked directly for her thoughts, Unola spoke carefully. I have lived in both worlds. White settlements fear what they don't understand, and fear makes them dangerous, but they also fear cost, in lives, in resources. If fighting Cherokee becomes too costly, they might indeed establish boundaries, at least temporarily. Her perspective, that of a former white settler who understood the political calculations behind removal policies, carried weight even among those initially skeptical of her presence. As the council stretched into the night, Tsula revealed his immediate purpose. We ride north in 3 days to join a larger gathering of resistance bands. I asked Niganegi to bring his warriors to stand with Cherokee from many regions in unified defense. The request hung in the air, weighted with implications. To accept meant choosing the path of armed resistance with all its dangers and uncertain outcomes. To refuse meant remaining isolated as pressure mounted from all sides. I will consider your words, Niganegi responded formally, and provide an answer before you depart. The council adjourned past midnight, the camp settling into uneasy sleep as individual conversations continued in low voices around smaller fires. Unola found herself unable to rest, her mind working through the complex situation from all angles. She walked to the valley's edge, finding a rocky outcropping that offered both solitude and a view of the moonlit landscape. The beauty of these mountains, the ancient forests, clear streams, and mist-wrapped peaks, stood in stark contrast to the human conflict threatening all who called them home. Soft footsteps approached, and she turned to find Sali joining her. The boy had grown taller during their months together, his face losing some of its childlike roundness, his eyes holding wisdom beyond his years. "What will my father decide?" he asked without preamble. Unola sighed. "I don't know. Both paths hold great risk." "You advised fighting," Sali observed. "I acknowledged it might create boundaries," she corrected gently. "That doesn't mean it's the right choice for your father's people." They sat in companionable silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sali spoke again, his voice softer. "I heard stories from Tsula warriors about raids, ambushes. They speak with pride about the militia killed." Unola studied him carefully. "Does that trouble you?" "I don't know," he admitted. "When I remember soldiers taking my mother, my sister, I feel anger that wants action. But when I remember how you treated my wound, how Dr. Freeman helped us escape—" He trailed off, conflicted. "Not all choices are between completely right and completely wrong," Unola told him. "Sometimes we must choose between difficult paths, knowing each brings both harm and hope." Dawn arrived with no clear decision from Niganegi. He spent the morning in private consultation with Gekanawida and other trusted elders, while Tsula warriors interacted with the camp's residents, sharing news, demonstrating weapons, techniques, exchanging stories of resistance. By midday, tension had built throughout the valley. Everyone sensed the significance of the choice before them, how it might alter their future irrevocably. When Niganegi finally called the council to reconvene, the entire camp gathered, conversation falling to hushed whispers, then silence. "I have listened to Tsulahaloga's words," Niganegi began, standing tall before the assembled bands. "I have consulted with the council, prayed for guidance. The path forward is clear, though not simple." He paused, his eyes moving across the gathered faces, his people who had trusted his leadership through years of hardship. "We cannot join the Northern Resistance as one band," he stated firmly. "Among us are elders who cannot fight, children who need protection, families who seek peace above all. I will not lead them into war." Tsulahaloga's expression darkened with disappointment, but Niganegi continued before he could speak. "However, neither can we ignore the growing threat. Our warriors who choose to fight must have that freedom. Those who wish to join Tsulahaloga's band may do so with my blessing." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This represented a significant shift, acknowledging the necessity of resistance while refusing to commit his entire band to that path. "And what of those who remain?" Tsulahaloga challenged. "Where will they find safety, if not behind warriors? Ready to defend them? West of Bald Mountain lies a valley system known to few," Niganegi replied. "Deep caves, hidden approaches, good hunting. Difficult to find, nearly impossible to attack. Families go there, establish more permanent settlement." It was a compromise position, dividing their people based on individual choice rather than imposing a single solution on all. Some warriors would join the resistance. Families and those unsuited for combat would establish a more secure, hidden community. "And you, Niganegi?" Tsulahaloga asked directly. "Where does the war chief of the Wolf clan stand in this division?" The question carried implicit challenge. A chief who chose safety over fighting might be seen as diminished in the eyes of other Cherokee leaders. Niganegi stood unmoving, his dignity intact under scrutiny. "My first duty is to lead my people to safety. Once families are established in western valleys, I will consider my personal path." His measured response neither committed to nor rejected the resistance movement, maintaining his autonomy while acknowledging the validity of both approaches. The council exploded into discussion, warriors conferring in small groups, families debating their options. Through it all, Unola observed the subtle dynamics at play, how Niganegi had maintained both his authority and the cohesion of his band while creating space for individual choice. By evening, decisions had been made. 12 warriors from Niganegi's band would join Tsulahaloga, departing in 3 days for the northern gathering. The remaining families would begin preparations to move to the western valleys, a journey that would commence once scouts returned with confirmed routes. As arrangements solidified, Tsulahaloga approached Unola directly, their first private conversation since his arrival. "The white woman who became Cherokee," he remarked, studying her with undisguised curiosity. "Your choice now seems especially significant." "How so?" she asked. "You stand between worlds in time of division. Your advice carries weight with Niganegi. Your presence reminds warriors that not all white faces bring death." He tilted his head slightly. "Will you fight or hide?" The blunt question caught her off guard. In truth, she had been so focused on the larger decision facing the band that she had not fully considered her own path in this division. "My place is with those who need protection," she answered finally. "My skills heal rather than harm." Tsulahaloga nodded, unsurprised. "We all serve in different ways." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "If you ever travel north, ask for Tsulahaloga's band. You would be welcome." The gesture of respect from the war chief touched her unexpectedly. Despite their different approaches, a bridge of understanding had formed, tentative but genuine. As Tsulahaloga walked away, Niganegi approached, having observed their interaction from a distance. "He sees your value," Niganegi noted. "As do I." "Have I chosen correctly?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "Perhaps I could be more useful with the resistance, explaining white tactics, weaknesses. The western valleys will need your knowledge." "And too," Niganegi replied, "and Sali needs your guidance. The boy stands at a crossroads between child and warrior. Your balance helps him find his way." The mention of Sali crystallized her priorities. The bond formed through their shared journey from her cabin to Blood Mountain had deepened into something familial. As his clan aunt in Cherokee tradition, she bore responsibility for his well-being and development that transcended the broader political decisions. "Then my path is clear," she affirmed. "When do we depart for the Western Valleys?" "Scouts leave tomorrow at dawn. If their reports are favorable, main group follows in 5 days." Niganegi's expression softened slightly. "Much will change again, sister, but Cherokee have always adapted while keeping what matters most." That night, beneath stars that had witnessed centuries of Cherokee life in these mountains, Unola reflected on the continuing evolution of her journey. From solitary widow to adopted clan member, from outsider to trusted advisor, each step had brought new challenges and deeper connections. Now another transition approached, one that promised greater security, but would take them farther from the world she had once known. As she drifted towards sleep, her last thought was of dogwoods blooming in spring valleys. Galilahi's prophecy, of return unfulfilled but not forgotten, a reminder that even in times of momentous change, some circles remained unbroken. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass. And these up, just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.